Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the forgotten pagan origins of New Year's Day, a world where ancient rituals, not glitzy fireworks, mark the turning of the year. What you're about to discover is a celebration woven with the threads of mystery and renewal. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the ancient city of Babylon, where the streets were paved with dust and intrigue, New Year's celebrations were no champagne-popping affair. Instead, the Babylonians kicked off their year with the Akidu festival, a 12-day extravaganza that makes our modern-day fireworks and resolutions look like a quiet night in. Celebrated around the vernal equinox, Akidu was more than just a party. It was a full-blown cosmic reboot. While today we might toast to new beginnings with a glass of bubbly, the Babylonians went for something a bit more theatrical. Picture this: drama, rituals, and sacrifices all rolled into a festival that could topple any Coachella lineup. Now, why spring? What's with the Babylonians' timing? Well, for starters, it wasn't just about the weather being more picnic-friendly. The Babylonians, in their infinite wisdom, realized that spring was the season when the world came back to life. Crops started sprouting, and everyone could finally shed their winter layers, both literally and metaphorically. This was an agricultural society, after all. The economy was tied to the land and its cycles, and the Babylonians understood that if they were to keep their bellies full and their society humming, they needed to pay homage to the gods who presumably controlled crop yields. But before you imagine the Akidu as some bucolic gathering of flower-crowned farmers, let's be clear, this was a serious affair. For 12 days, Babylon was the center of the universe, or at least it felt like it. The festival began with the king being temporarily dethroned. Yes, the king, the big cheese, the top banana, was stripped of his regalia and publicly humiliated. This ritual of humility was supposed to remind everyone, especially the king, that he was just a mortal who needed the gods' favor as much as the next guy. Then came the procession of statues, a sort of divine meet and greet. The Babylonians would parade their guards, Marduk being the headliner, through the streets, a ceremonial act that was supposed to ensure divine protection and prosperity. Picture a float parade, but instead of giant inflatable cartoon characters, they had imposing statues of deities that required a bit more reverence and a lot less helium. This wasn't just an excuse to throw a party, it was a reset button for the cosmos. By reenacting the myth of Marduk defeating the chaos monster Tiamat, the Babylonians believed they were ensuring stability and order for the year ahead. Talk about a high-stakes drama. It was the ancient version of a blockbuster franchise, complete with epic battles and divine interventions. Economically, the timing of Akidu was no accident. Spring marked the start of the agricultural year, and this was a society that understood the importance of getting things right from the get-go. The Babylonians knew that a good harvest wasn't just a hope, it was a necessity. Without the grains and goods flowing, you could kiss prosperity goodbye. The festival was a communal investment, a way to ensure that the gods were on board with the year's plans and that the community was bound together in shared purpose. So, while today's New Year's shindigs often leave us with nothing more than a hangover and a few half-hearted resolutions, the Babylonians were playing the long game. They saw their celebrations as a way to secure the future, not just mark the passing of time. The Akidu was a blend of spiritual duty, economic necessity, and social cohesion. And let's face it, a 12-day festival is a commitment. It's not just about ringing in a new year. It's about ensuring that year is worth living. In contrast, our modern January 1st celebrations can seem, well, a bit anticlimactic. Sure, we've got the ball dropping in Times Square, but where's the cosmic drama, the societal upheaval, the public dethroning of leaders? Okay, maybe we don't need that last one. But there's something undeniably appealing about the idea of starting the year with not just a bang, but a full-scale epic. And here's a kicker. The Babylonian fixation on resetting the cosmos wasn't just for philosophical kicks. They were dead serious about ensuring their society's survival and prosperity. It's easy to romanticize the Akidu as a quaint festival of old, But in reality, it was a critical piece of the Babylonian survival strategy. They understood that their fate was inextricably linked to the whims of nature and the gods, and they were willing to put on quite the show to keep the universe in their favor. But let's not kid ourselves. It wasn't all solemn rituals and divine pleas. The Akiru was also a chance for the Babylonians to let loose, reconnect, and maybe even find a bit of joy in the chaos of existence. After all, what's a New Year celebration without a little revelry? Whether they were feasting, dancing, or just catching up with old friends, the Babylonians knew how to ring in the year right. So next time you're nursing your New Year's Eve hangover, spare a thought for those ancient Babylonians. While they might not have had the luxury of a Netflix binge to recover from their festivities, they had something perhaps even more valuable, a community bound together by tradition, faith, and the hope for a prosperous year ahead. And maybe, just maybe, there's something we can learn from their cosmic party planning. So next time you're nursing your New Year's Eve hangover, spare a thought for those ancient Babylonians. While they might not have had the luxury of a Netflix binge to recover from their festivities, they had something perhaps even more valuable, a community bound together by tradition, faith, and the hope for a prosperous year ahead. And maybe, just maybe, there's something we can learn from their cosmic party planning. Now, let's fast forward a few centuries and hop over to Rome, where the calendar was as stable as a drunk acrobat on a tightrope. For a society that gave us aqueducts and roads that still work, unlike your GPS, the Romans had a surprisingly shaky grasp on timekeeping. You see, before Julius Caesar decided to take the calendar by the horns in 45 BC, the Roman calendar was a hot mess of political manipulation and astronomical guesswork. Originally, the Roman calendar was a lunar affair, which sounds poetic until you realize it made the year about 355 days long. That's a solid 10 days short of a full solar year. So what did the Romans do? They periodically tossed in an extra month called Mercedonius whenever things got too out of whack. Imagine having a month that only shows up when someone remembers it. It's like that friend who RSVP maybe to your party and then decides last minute. The problem was, this ad hoc calendrical fix was ripe for exploitation. In the hands of politicians, it became a tool for extending terms in office and messing with election cycles. Because, of course, why not use the calendar as a political weapon? Enter Julius Caesar, a man who knew a thing or two about seizing control. When he wasn't busy crossing Rubicons or rebranding himself as a dictator, Caesar decided he'd had enough of the calendar chaos. In 45 BC, he introduced the Julian calendar, which was a game changer. Borrowing from the Egyptians, because why reinvent the sundial? Caesar's calendar was solar-based, boasting 365 days with an extra day tacked on every fourth year. Leap year, baby. But let's not pretend Caesar was just a benevolent timekeeper. His decision to start the year on January 1st was as political as it was practical. January was named after Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and transitions, which was symbolically neat. But more importantly, it aligned the Roman civil calendar with the consular year, which started when new consuls took office. In other words, it made the political year and the calendar year sing the same tune, a symphony orchestrated by Caesar himself. Talk about a power move. This calendrical reform wasn't just an exercise in precision. It was an assertion of Roman order over chaos, imperial propaganda etched in time. By standardizing the calendar, Rome could synchronize its vast empire, ensuring that from the Britons to the Egyptians, everyone was marching to the same beat. It was as much about control as it was about keeping track of harvests or holidays. And here's the kicker. While the Julian calendar was a vast improvement, it was off by 11 minutes a year. Over centuries, this would add up to a significant drift. But hey, details, details. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, also used the calendar to reinforce social hierarchies and religious observances. Festivals and feast days were strategically placed to coincide with agricultural cycles, military campaigns, and civic duties. It's like having a calendar that not only tells you when to plant your crops, but also when to invade Gaul or pay your taxes. No wonder the average Roman citizen was left scratching their head, trying to remember if today was for worship, war, or work. And let's swoon over the romance of it all before we get too cynical. Romans loved their festivals. Saturnalia, the ultimate winter bash, was a week-long revelry of gifts, feasts, and role reversals. where slaves could mark their masters. Who wouldn't want that kind of New Year chaos? But behind the festal facade lay a society meticulously engineered to serve the state's ambitions. The calendar was as much a tool of empire as a legionary sword. So, next time you glance at your planner or phone calendar, remember you're holding a relic of ancient power struggles and celestial calculations. It's a reminder that while we might complain about daylight saving time, at least we're not stuck waiting for Mercedonius to decide if it's showing up this year. That's the kind of human ingenuity and folly that keeps history so delightfully messy. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where New Year's Day was treated like an unwanted guest at a royal banquet, shuffled around so often that it could have had its own travelogue. This was a time when the calendar was less a tool of cosmic order and more a chaotic scrapbook of religious and political whims. If the Romans had been the maestros of calendrical precision, medieval Europe was the juggler trying to keep a dozen flaming torches in the air without setting the place on fire. The Church, in all its medieval might, decided that the pagan roots of New Year's celebrations needed a makeover, or rather, an exorcism. They weren't too keen on the idea of folks ringing in the new year with Bacchic revelry or Saturnalian role reversal. So, what did they do? They moved the date around like an indecisive vacation planner. Various regions celebrated New Year's Day at different times. March 25th, December 25th, Easter Sunday, and yes, even January 1st. You could say they were spoilt for choice, except this wasn't about choice. It was about bringing order to what they saw as a spiritual free-for-all. March 25th, known as the Feast of the Annunciation, was a popular pick. The logic. It was 9 months before Christmas, marking the incarnation of Christ, which the Church thought was a much holier way to start the year than, say, drinking ale with your neighbor and making questionable resolutions. The funny thing is, this ecclesiastical meddling created more chaos than it solved. Imagine living in a time where crossing a border might mean stepping into a new year altogether, not because of time zones, but because of calendar zones. Talk about a logistical nightmare. Economically, this calendrical shuffle was less about agriculture and more about aligning with the Church's liturgical calendar. The feasts and fasts dictated the rhythm of life, a divine metronome ticking away the days. The Church held sway over time itself, a power that was both spiritual and practical. It ensured that the faithful were quite literally on the same page when it came to salvation history. But let's not kid ourselves. This was as much about control as it was about holiness. The Church's grip on the calendar was a reminder that while empires might rise and fall, the Church was the eternal constant, or at least that's how they liked to see it. Of course, all this ecclesiastical time tinkering wasn't without its hiccups. The Julian calendar, with its 11-minute annual drift, was still the standard, so even the Church's attempts at order were built on a wobbly foundation. By the 16th century, this drift had accumulated to a 10-day discrepancy between the calendar and the equinoxes. Enter Pope Gregory Roman XIII, the man who decided enough was enough, and rolled out the Gregorian calendar in 1582. Talk about a papal intervention. The new calendar cut out 10 days to realign the dates with the solar year. October 4th was followed by October 15th, and just like that, 10 days vanished into the ether. Imagine waking up to find out you'd missed a week and a half of life. It's a good thing they didn't have social media back then. The hashtag confusion alone would have broken the internet. Economically, the Gregorian reform was crucial. It realigned religious festivals and agricultural cycles, ensuring that Easter, a movable feast dependent on the vernal equinox, stayed in its springtime slot. This was no small feat. Easter was the linchpin of the Christian calendar, its date affecting everything from Lent to Pentecost. And while the reform was adopted quickly in Catholic countries, others took their sweet time. Protestant holdouts like Britain didn't adopt the new calendar until 1752, by which time they were 11 days behind their continental neighbors. It took an act of Parliament to finally bring them into line, with September 2nd, 1752, being followed by September 14th. The change sparked riots, with some folks demanding their lost days back. It's a classic case of not seeing the forest for the trees. But while the Church was busy trying to sanctify the calendar, the people were, unsurprisingly, reluctant to let go of their beloved pagan traditions. The timing of New Year's celebrations often coincided with local customs that were, shall we say, less than pious. In England, for instance, the tradition of first footing on New Year's Day, where the first person to enter a home after midnight brought gifts for luck, had more in common with ancient superstitions than Christian doctrine. Yet these customs persisted, a testament to the enduring appeal of human nature's penchant for revelry and ritual. The church may have been the official timekeeper, but the people held the stopwatch of tradition, and while the ecclesiastical elite were busy rearranging the calendar like a game of divine Tetris, the common folk were more concerned with ensuring that their crops grew, their livestock thrived, and their communities stayed bonded through the shared experience of celebration. It was a delicate balance between the sacred and the secular, a dance that continues in many ways to this day. So, next time you're raising a glass at a New Year's party, remember that the date you're celebrating wasn't always so set in stone. The path to January 1st was a labyrinthine journey through political maneuvers, religious dictates, and cultural traditions. It's a reminder that even something as seemingly mundane as a calendar date is steeped in historical intrigue and human folly. And who knows, maybe in the future we'll shuffle the deck again. After all, if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that time is as much about perception as it is about precision. The Gregorian calendar. Pope Gregory Roman XIII attempt to wrangle the unruly beast that was time. You see, by the late 16th century, the Julian calendar was like a well-worn sweater, full of holes and stretched at the seams. The 11-minute annual drift had accumulated to a decadal gap, causing Easter to edge ever closer to a summer holiday rather than the springtime celebration the church so desperately wanted it to be. Gregory's solution: trim the fat, cut 10 days off the calendar. October 4th, 1582, magically became October 15th overnight. It was like the ultimate time travel hack without the need for a DeLorean. Now, one might think this papal edict would be met with universal acclaim, like the invention of pizza or cat videos. But no, dear listener, this was 1582, and geopolitics was as messy as a toddler with a bowl of spaghetti. The Protestant Reformation had turned Europe into a patchwork quilt of religious allegiances, with Catholic and Protestant states eyeing each other like rival siblings, forced to share a bunk bed. And here was a Catholic pope telling everyone to rip 10 days out of their lives. It was about as popular as a new tax. Catholic countries like Spain, Portugal, and Italy jumped on the Gregorian bandwagon immediately. After all, when the Pope spoke, they listened. But the Protestant nations, suspicious of anything that smelled of papal influence, dug in their heels. England, for instance, scoffed at the Gregorian calendar, sticking stubbornly to the Julian until 1752. That's right. They held out for 170 years, like a kid refusing to eat their vegetables long after everyone else had finished dinner. It wasn't until they realized they were out of sync with the international community, missing out on trade opportunities and confusing allies, that they begrudgingly adjusted their clocks. And let's not even get started on the comedic chaos this caused. Picture two merchants from different countries trying to schedule a meeting. One shows up on January 10th, the other on January 20th, both convinced they're right on time. It was like a centuries-long episode of Who's On First. And while we're laughing, remember there were real economic consequences. Trade deals fell apart, diplomatic missions were bungled, and people were left scratching their heads, wondering why their French counterparts seemed to be living in a slightly accelerated timeline. But beyond the political and economic hiccups, the Gregorian reform highlighted a deeper truth about human nature, our aversion to change. People are creatures of habit, and the idea of waking up to find 10 days vanished was unsettling, to say the least. Some folks genuinely believed they'd been robbed of part of their lives. In the British Isles, the change sparked riots, with protesters demanding their missing days back. It's a testament to the human condition, resistance to change, even when staying the same is demonstrably worse. Economically, the Gregorian calendar was a game changer. By aligning the calendar with the solar year, it ensured that agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and civic duties were in sync. This was crucial for an agrarian society dependent on precise timing for planting and harvesting crops. The calendar reform wasn't just about religious observance, it was about survival. It allowed societies to plan more effectively, reducing the risk of famine and economic instability. But let's not forget the underlying irony. This was a reform based on science, astronomical observations, to be precise, yet it was mired in religious and political squabbles. It's a classic case of science versus belief, a theme that echoes through history like a particularly catchy tune you just can't shake. The Gregorian calendar was a testament to human ingenuity, but also to our propensity for letting ideology cloud practical judgment. As the calendar reform rolled out across Europe, it wasn't just the political and economic spheres that felt its impact. Socially, the change was a catalyst for a new way of thinking about time. It marked a shift from a religiously dominated worldview to one where science and rationality began to take precedence. The Enlightenment was just around the corner, and the calendar reform was a harbinger of things to come, a subtle yet powerful reminder that humanity was on the brink of a new era. And while the Gregorian calendar eventually became the global standard, it wasn't without its quirks and local adaptations. Russia, for example, held out until after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, adopting the Gregorian calendar in 1918. The shift caused the famous October Revolution to be celebrated in November, a delightful little calendrical irony. It's these historical oddities that remind us of the tangled web of time and culture, and how even something as seemingly mundane as a calendar can be a battlefield for ideas. So, as you mark January 1st on your sleek digital calendar, remember that this date, seemingly set in stone, is a testament to centuries of debate, negotiation, and, dare I say, stubbornness. It's a reminder that while we might plan our lives down to the minute, time itself is a construct we've been trying to perfect for millennia, and we're still working on it. Next time you're late for an appointment, you can always blame it on the calendar. After all, history shows us that time is as much about human error as it is about celestial precision. And isn't that what makes it all so fascinatingly human? Time, that elusive beast, has been a playground for human folly and ingenuity. As we hurtle towards New Year's Eve, a night where the whole planet seems to agree on one thing, celebrating, we're actually tapping into an ancient rhythm. It's all about the laughable irony. An ancient agricultural festival has transformed into a global bash, complete with fireworks, questionable resolutions, and the clinking of glasses that are often more than half full. Our modern New Year celebrations are a glorious cocktail of pagan roots and medieval meddling, with a twist of modern indulgence. That feeling of starting anew. Thank the Babylonians, who effectively invented the New Year, Numi mantra with their Akiru festival, a cosmic reset button that makes today's resolutions look like flimsy post-it notes. They understood that you don't just stumble into a new year, you seize it with rituals that ensure survival and prosperity. Fast forward a few millennia, and we're still clinging to a diluted version of this idea, albeit with more fizz and less cosmic significance. And those January 1st celebrations, tip your hat to Julius Caesar. His audacious calendar reform wasn't just about precision. It was a political masterstroke, aligning Rome's civil and consular years. He turned time into a tool of power and unity, a legacy that still ticks away on our smartphones every time we swipe to a new year. It's a reminder that even as we sip our champagne, we're part of a timeline that stretches back to when time was a currency of control, not just a measure of minutes. But let's not forget the medieval churches starring role in this calendrical drama. In their quest to Christianize time itself, they shuffled New Year's Day around the calendar like a game of spiritual musical chairs. When they finally settled on January 1st, it was less about new beginnings and more about sidelining pagan indulgence. Yet, despite their best efforts, the appeal of a wild, uninhibited celebration proved hard to quash. The church may have tried to sanctify the calendar, but our collective yearning for revelry and renewal is as stubborn as a mule in a toga. The reality is, our New Year's blowout is a testament to humanity's knack for taking ancient traditions, tweaking them, and wrapping them in a shiny new package. The countdown, the midnight kiss, the bang of fireworks, all echoes of past rituals that have been rebranded for a modern audience. It's a delightful blend of old and new, a nod to our ancestors who saw time not as a straight line, but as a cyclical dance between chaos and order. Economically, New Year's remains a powerhouse. Just ask the retailers who capitalize on our post-holiday spending sprees, or the party planners who transform venues into epicenters of celebration. The ancient Babylonians might have seen their festivals as cosmic investments, but today's festivities are a literal cash cow. In 2023 alone, Americans spent an estimated $1 billion on fireworks, a testament to our enduring desire to light up the sky and start the year with a bang. It's a perfect illustration of how economic necessity and cultural tradition continue to waltz hand in hand through history. Of course, the evolution of New Year's isn't just about grand parties and fiscal opportunities. It's also a reflection of our collective psyche, a mirror held up to humanity's need for hope and renewal. The Babylonians sought divine favor for a bountiful harvest, while we seek a fresh start, a clean slate to scribble our aspirations upon. It's the ultimate act of optimism, a reminder that no matter how chaotic the past year has been, the next one holds the promise of something better. And let's not overlook the humor in all this. The fact that a festival rooted in ancient agrarian cycles has become an excuse for global revelry is nothing short of comedic genius. We've taken a solemn ritual of survival and spun it into a kaleidoscope of cultures, each adding their own twist. From Spain's grape-eating tradition to Scotland's Hogmanay fire festivals, it's a smorgasbord of human creativity and resilience. So as you raise your glass to 2024, remember that the clinking of your glass echoes through time. It's a salute to the Babylonians who knew the power of a good party, to the Romans who synchronized the empire to a single beat, and to the medieval church who tried to tame the calendar's unruly spirit. It's a toast to the indomitable human urge to celebrate, to hope, and to connect across the ages. In the end, New Year's is more than just a date on the calendar. It's a testament to our shared history, a living tapestry woven from threads of cosmic festivals, political maneuvers, and spiritual quests. It's a reminder that even as we look to the future, we're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. And perhaps that's the most beautiful irony of all. In our quest to embrace the new, we're forever linked to the past. Cheers to that splendid, timeless dance. In the quaint town of Dole, France, perched on the edge of the Jura Mountains, a young Louis Pasteur was busily sketching yet another portrait. But hold your horses. This wasn't the kind of brilliant beginning you might expect for a man who'd led a revolutionized medicine. Nope, our budding artist was more interested in capturing the likeness of his family's cows than fiddling with test tubes. Born on December 27, 1822, Louis was the son of a tanner, a not-so-glamorous job that involved turning animal hides into leather, positively glamorous if you were into bad smells and hard, smelly work. Life in Dole wasn't exactly the fast lane. With a population teetering around 3,000 people, everyone probably knew the quality of each other's Sunday roast. Yet, for Louis, it was a canvas for potential. As a child, he spent more time doodling than devouring any scientific texts. His teachers probably sighed deeply at his portraits, though to be fair, he did occasionally manage a decent likeness of Napoleon. Young Louis, with his penchant for portraiture, might have been on a path to become the next great French artist, or at least a pretty decent sketch artist, had it not been for a twist of fate. Now, if you're imagining Louis as a little genius with a lab coat, think again. School report cards were decidedly average. Yes, you heard that right. Average, the kind you'd stick to the fridge with a magnet and a hopeful note to do better next time. He wasn't exactly failing, but he certainly wasn't setting the academic world on fire. It wasn't until 1839, when he left Dole for the big city of Besançon, that things started to change. And by big city, I mean a place with roughly 30,000 people, which to Louis probably seemed like a bustling metropolis. At the Royal College of Besançon, the teenage Pasteur flirted with subjects like physics and mathematics, but his grades stayed stubbornly unremarkable. He still preferred his pencil and sketchbook over any scientific apparatus. But then, something curious happened. He encountered chemistry. Yes, the subject that would eventually have him boiling beakers and saving humanity from itself. At this point, it was more of a casual interest, kind of like when you start watching a TV show because everyone else is talking about it. Pasteur's chemistry teacher, feeling he had potential somewhere under those doodles, encouraged him to take his studies seriously. Picture a skeptical Louis, probably thinking, "Sure, chemistry is interesting, but have you seen my portrait of Napoleon?" Nevertheless, He buckled down and started to take his studies more seriously. It was a big step for a kid who once seemed destined to paint cows forever. By 1842, Louis had advanced enough to pass the baccalaureate exam in Paris, though just barely. His grades in science were still nothing to write home about, and his art teachers might have been the only ones who saw a future in his burgeoning talents. But as fate would have it, Louis wasn't destined to be the next Picasso. Instead, he found himself drawn into the scientific world, like a moth to the proverbial flame. Louis enrolled at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, a prestigious school known for churning out some of France's finest minds. Finally, he was in an environment where intellectual curiosity was not just encouraged, it was expected. Here, surrounded by budding geniuses, Louis discovered that while his portraits were quite charming, his real flair lay in the bubbling concoctions and chemical reactions of the laboratory. It's as if the universe leaned in and whispered, "Hey, forget the crayons, grab that test tube." The story of how Louis Pasteur switched lanes from art to science is one of those delightful what-ifs in history. What if he had remained a portrait artist? Would we be hanging his art in the Louvre today, or would he have ended up as another name lost to time, overshadowed by more famous artists? Luckily for us, and for the millions saved by his later discoveries, Louis left his sketchbook behind. His early flirtation with art may have been a detour, but it was one that led him to a field where he could really make a difference. So, why should you care about his average grades and artistic detours? Because they make Pasteur all the more relatable. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't born with a microscope in hand. He was a normal kid with normal interests, who eventually found his calling. It's a comforting reminder that even the most brilliant lights in history often start as flickering flames, waiting to find their fuel. And as for those early doodles, well, they've become a quirky footnote in the biography of a man who would one day be credited with saving more lives than he could have ever imagined, certainly more than he could have sketched. But that's a story for another day. For now, just remember, sometimes the path to greatness begins with a doodle. While Louis Pasteur's early years were marked by sketches and the faint aroma of tanneries, his later work would leave an indelible mark not just on science, but on our very way of life. Fast forward to the mid-19th century, and Louis is no longer the doodling student with dreams of artistic fame. Instead, he's knee-deep in the bubbling world of fermentation, a world that promises more surprises than any sketchbook ever could. So, what's the big deal about fermentation? Well, back then, it wasn't just about turning grapes into wine or barley into beer. It was the lifeblood of France's economy, the backbone of its cultural identity, and let's be honest, its national pastime. But there was a hitch. France's wine industry was in a pickle. Wine was spoiling faster than you could say santé, and nobody knew why. Enter Pasteur, the man who would soon be known as the savior of French viticulture. Picture 1857, a time when the wine industry was under siege by an invisible enemy. Enter Louis, now a full-fledged scientist, who was intrigued by the mystery of why wine turned sour. Was it witchcraft? A curse from the gods of indulgence? The reality, as Pasteur discovered, was far more fascinating and infinitely more microscopic. He unveiled the role of yeast in fermentation, a process that had been as mysterious as the Mona Lisa's smile until then. By peering through his trusty microscope, Louis confirmed that fermentation was essentially a biochemical dance of microorganisms. But here's where things get delightfully ironic. Pasteur's contemporaries were skeptical, if not downright dismissive. Imagine telling French winemakers that tiny, invisible creatures were responsible for their beloved wine. It was like suggesting that leprechauns were to blame for a bad harvest. Yet Pasteur persisted, his belief in science as unshakable as a cork in a bottle of Bordeaux. Pasteur's experiments with heat, now famously known as pasteurization, were a game-changer. Imagine the collective gasp when he proposed heating wine to kill off the harmful bacteria without altering the taste. Heat wine, sacrilege. To many, it was akin to suggesting that the Eiffel Tower should be painted polka dot. But Pasteur, ever the empiricist, proved them wrong. By heating wine to a precise 55 degrees Celsius for a short period, he showed that the wine remained unspoiled, sparking an oenological revolution. The economic impact was staggering. By saving France's wine industry, Pasteur was also saving countless jobs and stabilizing a vital sector of the economy. In today's terms, it's like a tech startup saving Silicon Valley from a catastrophic crash. The numbers were telling. Wine exports soared, and France's reputation as the world's wine capital was preserved. Pasteur's method was quickly adopted, and the rest, as they say, is history. But the path to acceptance wasn't all rosy. The scientific community, predictably skeptical, was slow to embrace Pasteur's findings. Many clung to outdated theories like barnacles on a ship, refusing to acknowledge the invisible microbial world that Pasteur championed. It was a classic case of science versus entrenched tradition, and Pasteur was the underdog with a microscope. Despite initial resistance, his work on fermentation laid the groundwork for future discoveries in microbiology and immunology. It was a stepping stone to understanding germs, disease, and ultimately, the development of vaccines. Pasteur's heated wine experiments were more than just a clever fix. They were the dawn of a new scientific era, one where microorganisms were finally given their due respect. And what about those who doubted him? Well, they eventually came around, as skeptics often do when faced with irrefutable evidence. In a delightful twist of fate, Pasteur became a national hero, celebrated not only for saving wine, but for his contributions to science and medicine. He was the toast of the town, literally and figuratively, and his methods became a cornerstone of modern food safety and medical practices. The romance of Pasteur's story is undeniable, but it's important to remember the gritty reality he faced: skepticism, ridicule, and the painstaking process of proving himself in a world that clung to old beliefs like a last glass of champagne. Yet, through it all, Pasteur's brilliance shone through, illuminating the path for future scientists and forever altering the course of history. So, next time you raise a glass of wine, spare a thought for Louis Pasteur, the man who not only saved the wine, but also paved the way for modern microbiology. His journey from the art studio to the laboratory is a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of truth. And remember, in a world filled with skeptics and doubters, sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are born not from genius alone, but from the courage to see what others cannot. Cheers to that. So, next time you raise a glass of wine, spare a thought for Louis Pasteur, the man who not only saved the wine, but also paved the way for modern microbiology. His journey from the art studio to the laboratory is a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of truth. And remember, in a world filled with skeptics and doubters, sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are born not from genius alone, but from the courage to see what others cannot. Cheers to that. And just when you thought Louis had hung up his cape after saving the wine industry, he was about to dive headfirst into another crisis. This time, it wasn't just about keeping France's spirits high. Nope, this was about saving the silk industry, the golden thread of 19th-century French economy, literally and figuratively. If wine was the liquid gold of France, silk was the shimmering fabric draping the nation's prosperity. Picture the mid-1860, when the French silk industry was in a tailspin. The culprit, a mysterious silkworm disease, or rather, a double whammy of diseases that were as pesky as a bad cold and as destructive as a tornado. Enter the silkworms, those humble caterpillars with a taste for mulberry leaves and a knack for producing silk threads finer than the finest human hair. They were dying by the millions, leaving behind nothing but shriveled hopes and empty cocoons. The economic impact was a gut punch, with silk output plummeting and prices skyrocketing. For France, a country that prided itself on its luxurious textiles, this was nothing short of a catastrophe. This is where our hero, Louis Pasteur, donned his scientific armor. The French government, in a state of desperation that only a nation in silk crisis can muster, turned to him for help. Imagine being asked to diagnose a problem that had baffled experts for years, like being handed a Rubik's Cube with the colors all mixed up and told, "Fix this, or else." But if there was one thing Pasteur was known for, it was his methodical approach. He was the Sherlock Holmes of science, minus the deerstalker hat. He began his investigation in the heart of the silk-producing region of Alès, where entire villages were built on the backs of these industrious little worms. Pasteur's approach was all about observation, watching, waiting, and learning. He spent hours scrutinizing the sick worms, documenting every symptom with the precision of a clockmaker. And here's the kicker. When Pasteur fell ill during his research, he had his entire laboratory moved to his sick. Talk about dedication. It was as if he was saying, I might be down, but science is always up. The silkworm disease, as Pasteur discovered, was no single villain. It was a tag-team effort of two diseases, pébrine and flasherie. Pébrine was caused by a microscopic parasite, essentially a bug within the bug, while flasherie was a bacterial infection, turning healthy caterpillars into silkless husks. Pasteur's breakthrough came when he realized that by selecting healthy eggs from disease-free moths, the cycle of sickness could be broken. It was a bit like choosing the best apples from the orchard to plant the next generation of trees, a simple yet revolutionary concept. The economic implications were as profound as they were immediate. With Pasteur's method, silk production could be revived, and French silk once again flowed into the markets, saving countless jobs and stabilizing the industry. It was akin to pulling a financial rabbit out of a hat made of the finest silk, naturally. The numbers were telling. By the late 1860, silk production was back on track, and France's reputation as a leader in luxury textiles was restored. What makes this story all the more incredible is the backdrop of skepticism. Pasteur was dealing with a scientific community that was still marinating in the juices of past theories, resistant to new ideas like a dog to a bath. Yet he persevered, his belief in empirical evidence as unyielding as the silk threads he sought to save. The romance of the tale lies in the juxtaposition of Pasteur, the meticulous scientist, against the backdrop of a world that often preferred tradition over innovation. But let's not get too carried away with the romance. The reality was that Pasteur's work was hard, relentless, and often thankless. He wasn't just battling silkworm diseases. He was battling human nature, our tendency to cling to what we know, even when it's wrong. And yet, through it all, Pasteur's dedication to truth and science never wavered. His work with the silkworms wasn't just about saving a single industry. It was about proving that method and observation, coupled with an unwavering commitment to evidence, could overcome even the most stubborn of obstacles. As for those who doubted him, well, history has a way of making skeptics eat their words. Pasteur's success with the silkworms cemented his reputation as a scientific powerhouse, a man whose methods were as unassailable as his results. He became a symbol of innovation, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed mired in its own doubts. So, the next time you admire a piece of silk, remember the story of Louis Pasteur and his fight against the silkworm diseases. It's a tale of persistence, of science triumphing over superstition, and of one man's unwavering dedication to the truth. And while the romance of the silk industry remains, it's tempered by the reality of the hard work and determination that saved it from ruin. Pasteur's legacy is woven into every thread, a testament to the power of observation and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. And as we look forward to the next chapter in Pasteur's life, one thing is clear: the journey is far from over. Now, if you thought Louis Pasteur was content to rest on his laurels after saving both wine and silk, hold on to your beakers. This guy was just getting warmed up. Enter the world of germ theory, a concept as radical to the 19th century as suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't flat. It was the mid-1800s, a time when people believed diseases were spread by miasmas, or bad air, which sounds like something straight out of a Monty Python sketch. You can imagine the skepticism when Pasteur and his microscopic buddies waltzed onto the scene, declaring that tiny, invisible organisms were the real culprits behind disease. Cue the collective eye roll from his contemporaries. But Pasteur wasn't deterred by the skepticism. Armed with his trusty microscope and a penchant for proving people wrong, he dove headfirst into germ theory, scientific sea as uncharted as the New World once was. He proposed that these minuscule invaders, not evil spirits or foul odors, were responsible for infections. It was the kind of revelation that made him the scientific equivalent of a rock star, minus the leather pants and groupies. Fast forward to the 1880, and Pasteur was on the verge of another breakthrough, the development of vaccines. Now, if you're thinking this was a smooth journey, think again. The idea of inoculating someone against a disease was as outlandish as suggesting that unicorns might be real. The medical community was split, with some doctors clinging to the idea that disease was a divine punishment. Meanwhile, Pasteur was about to turn the world of medicine on its head with his rabies vaccine. Rabies, back then, was a death sentence. If you got bit by a rabid animal, you might as well start writing your will. Enter Joseph Meister, a 9-year-old boy bitten by a rabid dog in 1885. Pasteur, who had been working on a rabies vaccine in his lab, faced a dilemma. While he had tested the vaccine on dogs, he had never tried it on a human. It was a high-stakes gamble, the kind that makes Vegas look like a game of Go Fish. But with Joseph's life hanging in the balance, Pasteur decided to administer the vaccine, a series of 13 injections over 14 days. The stakes were enormous. If it failed, Pasteur would be vilified, his career in tatters. Success, however, would mean a monumental leap forward in medicine. The result: Joseph Meister survived, becoming the first person successfully treated for rabies. Pasteur's daring move paid off, transforming him into a scientific legend. It was as if he just hit the jackpot on a slot machine labeled human progress. The economic and social implications were staggering. Rabies wasn't just a medical issue. It was a societal scourge, affecting livestock and human beings alike. By taming it, Pasteur not only saved lives, but also safeguarded livelihoods. The success of the rabies vaccine laid the groundwork for more vaccines, turning Pasteur into a household name, the kind you'd mention in the same breath as Newton or Galileo. Yet, even with this triumph, Pasteur faced criticism. Some people thought his methods were as fanciful as a fairy tale. The idea of injecting a weakened form of a virus into a healthy body seemed like madness to many. Doctors and laypeople alike were skeptical, if not downright hostile. It was a classic case of human nature resisting change, like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. But Pasteur's unyielding belief in his work turned skeptics into believers. Slowly but surely, the medical community came around, swayed by the undeniable success of his vaccines. It's a testament to Pasteur's tenacity, his ability to see what others couldn't, and his willingness to challenge the status quo. In a world that often feared the unfamiliar, Pasteur was a beacon of innovation, lighting the path for future discoveries. As we look back, it's easy to romanticize Pasteur's journey, to picture him as a lone genius battling ignorance. But the reality was far grittier. He was a man of science in an age of superstition, a visionary in a world that often preferred comfort over truth. His story is one of relentless pursuit, of daring to dream when others doubted. So, as we toast to Pasteur's legacy, let's not just remember the breakthroughs. Let's remember the grit, the determination, and the courage it took to change the world. And as we inch closer to the next chapter in Pasteur's incredible life, one thing is certain: the story isn't over yet. There are more discoveries to be made, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. And if Pasteur taught us anything, it's that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey worth taking, no matter the odds. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Louis Pasteur just yet. We've got to talk about this guy's quirks, like his staunch refusal to shake hands. Yes, Louis Pasteur, the man who laid the foundation for germ theory, was a bona fide germaphobe. You might even say he was the original hand sanitizer enthusiast, long before anyone had even thought to bottle Purell. It's a delightful irony, really, that a man so deeply entrenched in the microscopic world of bacteria would be so averse to engaging with the macro world of human contact. It's said that Pasteur, in his later years, would go to great lengths to avoid touching anyone, preferring the safety of a polite nod or a tip of the hat. Now, before you roll your eyes at his seemingly eccentric behavior, consider this: the guy knew what was lurking on those palms. In a time when antiseptic practices were about as common as unicorn sightings, Pasteur's caution was less about paranoia and more about self-preservation. After all, he was the one who had peered through his trusty microscope and seen the bacterial battleground firsthand. But Pasteur's quirks weren't just limited to handshakes. He was a man of habits, some of which were downright peculiar. For instance, his laboratory was a sanctuary where chaos was not welcome. Every tool had its place, every experiment its proper procedure. You could say he ran his lab with all the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, but one with a penchant for boiling beakers and a deep suspicion of dirt. This meticulous nature was both his strength and his curse. While it led to groundbreaking discoveries, it also made him the kind of person who probably alphabetized his spices and labeled his leftovers. His attention to detail bordered on obsession, but it was precisely this obsession that fueled his scientific breakthroughs. Now, let's zoom out and look at the broader canvas of Pasteur's legacy. The impact of his work on modern medicine is nothing short of monumental. His development of vaccines laid the groundwork for the eradication of diseases like smallpox and polio, illnesses that once ravaged populations with the ferocity of a wildfire. Today, thanks to Pasteur's pioneering efforts, vaccines save an estimated 2-3 million lives each year. That's like filling Wembley Stadium 30 times over with people who might otherwise not be here. And pasteurization. It's the unsung hero of food safety, ensuring that your morning milk doesn't come with a side of deadly bacteria. Yet, like any towering figure, Pasteur's legacy isn't without its shadows. Some modern historians have questioned the ethics of his methods, noting that his experiments sometimes teetered on the edge of ethical boundaries. His vaccine trials, for instance, were conducted with a level of urgency that left little room for the type of rigorous, controlled testing we expect today. The stakes were high, and the line between desperation and innovation was often blurred. It's a classic example of the ends justifying the means, a dilemma as old as time itself. And then there's the question of credit. While Pasteur is rightly celebrated, it's important to remember he didn't work in a vacuum. He was part of a broader scientific community, a tapestry of minds that included contemporaries like Robert Koch and Joseph Lister, who were also unraveling the mysteries of the microbial world. Science is rarely the work of a solitary genius. It's more like a relay race, with each researcher passing the baton of knowledge to the next. Pasteur was a key runner in that race, but he wasn't running alone. Economically, Pasteur's breakthroughs were transformative. His work on fermentation alone saved France's wine and silk industries from ruin, sectors critical to the national economy. In today's terms, it was like bailing out Wall Street and Main Street in one fell swoop. His innovations provided a blueprint for modern public health initiatives, which have since become linchpins in global economic stability. The numbers don't lie. Healthier populations translate into stronger economies, and Pasteur was instrumental in setting that wheel in motion. Socially, Pasteur's impact was equally profound. He changed how people thought about disease, shifting the narrative from one of inevitability to one of prevention. His work fostered a culture of hygiene that, while initially met with skepticism, eventually became the norm. Today, we take for granted the importance of washing our hands and covering our coughs, practices that, in Pasteur's time, were as revolutionary as the idea that the earth revolved around the sun. So, what can we take away from the life and legacy of Louis Pasteur? For one, it's a reminder that progress often comes from the unlikeliest of places. Who would have thought a kid more interested in doodling than dissecting would go on to redefine medicine? His story is a testament to the power of curiosity, the importance of perseverance, and the impact one person can have on the world. Pasteur's legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of triumph and controversy, innovation and obsession. He was a man of his time, yet his ideas transcended it. And as we look to the future, grappling with our own microbial adversaries, his lessons remain as relevant as ever. In a world that often seems divided and uncertain, Pasteur's life serves as a beacon of hope, a reminder that with courage and conviction, we can overcome even the most formidable challenges. In the end, Louis Pasteur was not just a man of science. He was a man of vision, whose insights continue to shape our world. His life is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is not just about answers, but about asking the right questions. And in that relentless quest for understanding, we find the true essence of human progress. So, here's to Pasteur, a hero in a lab coat, a dreamer with a microscope, and a legacy that will endure long after the last experiment is conducted. In the grand tapestry of human history, some civilizations have left behind colossal footprints. The Khmer Empire is one of those giants, striding across Southeast Asia with a certain swagger that only comes when you've got 1,000 tons of rice in your back pocket. To truly appreciate the rise of this empire, let's rewind to the 9th century, a time before 24-hour news cycles and social media influencers, when the real influencers were guys like Roman II. This dude didn't just want to be a king, he wanted to be a god king, which is just one robe away from full-blown megalomania. Roman II kicked things off around 802 AD, officially founding the Khmer Empire and planting its roots in a region that would become famous for Angkor. Geography played the ultimate wingman to Jayavarman's ambitions. Nestled in the heart of what we now call Cambodia, the Khmer heartland was a lush, fertile expanse along the Tarnal Sap Lake and the Mekong River. And let's be real, if you're going to build an empire, you might as well do it in a place that's practically begging to feed your armies and workers. Our man Jayavarman wasn't just a guy with a crown. He was a visionary who understood that ruling required more than just a fancy title. Declaring himself a Divaraja, the Guard King, was a masterstroke of political theatre. It was like saying, I'm not just the boss, I'm the divine boss, which probably did wonders for discouraging dissent. This wasn't just a power move. It was a strategic play to unify various Khmer tribes under one celestial banner, blending religion and politics into a potent cocktail of authority. Now, if you think the only thing on the Khmer Empire's playlist was Guard King, think again. Expansion was the name of the game, and the Khmer were serious players. Over the next few centuries, the empire stretched its muscles, reaching into what are now Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and beyond. This wasn't some weekend hike. We're talking a vast empire at its peak, around the 12th century, stretching over 1,000 kilometers. Yet as much as the Khmer loved their land grabs, they loved rice even more. Rice was the lifeblood of the Khmer economy. The empire wasn't just surviving on it. They were thriving, thanks to a complex system of canals and reservoirs that made sure every grain was worth its weight in gold. Think of it as an ancient irrigation network that put modern plumbing to shame. With these hydrological wonders, the Khmer could churn out enough rice to feed an army, or several. It's estimated they produced over 1,000 tons of rice annually, which is enough carbs to fuel a small nation of marathon runners. This agricultural prowess wasn't just about feeding the masses. It was the backbone of their economic might, allowing them to bankroll grand projects like Angkor Wat. And speaking of Angkor Wat, let's not forget that this isn't just any temple complex. It's a testament to the Khmer's audacious architectural ambition, a sprawling masterpiece that took roughly 30 years to complete. Built under the reign of Suryavarman II in the early 12th century, the temple was originally dedicated to Vishnu, a Hindu deity, before gradually morphing into a Buddhist site as the empire's religious tides shifted. It's a bit like watching a blockbuster movie franchise switch genres mid-series. Unexpected, but somehow it works. But here's where it gets juicy. The construction of Angkor Wat wasn't just a testament to religious devotion. It was a colossal flex of the empire's resources and labor. You didn't just snap your fingers and get a wonder of the world. You marshaled tens of thousands of workers, artists, and architects. The sheer logistics of moving massive sandstone blocks from quarries over 50 kilometers away is mind-boggling. Imagine trying to coordinate a massive construction project in an age without cranes, trucks, or even a decent cup of coffee. It's enough to make any modern contractor break out in hives. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Khmer Empire wasn't just about temples and terraces. The harsh reality was that its splendor came at a cost. While the romanticized image of a benevolent god king ruling over a harmonious empire is a nice bedtime story, the truth is far more complex. The empire's expansion often meant warfare, with vassal states and neighboring kingdoms frequently on the receiving end of Khmer ambition. And as with any great power, the fall was as dramatic as the rise. But that's a tale for another time. In the end, the Khmer Empire was a symphony of contradictions, a blend of divine authority and earthly ambition, spiritual devotion and imperial conquest. It was a civilization that built wonders and waged wars, all under the watchful eyes of its god kings. The rise of the Khmer didn't just shape Southeast Asia. It left an indelible mark on the fabric of history, a reminder of what humanity can achieve when it dares to dream big and dig even bigger. As the dust settles on the grand tale of the Khmer Empire, it's time to zoom in on the piece de resistance, Angkor Wat. This isn't just another ancient ruin. It's the crown jewel of Khmer architecture, built under King Suryavarman II's reign in the 12th century. Now, if you think constructing a temple complex of this magnitude was a walk in the park, let me introduce you to a little thing called reality. This was no small feat. It was a Herculean task involving 5 million tons of sandstone, tens of thousands of laborers, and probably enough sweat to fill the Tarnal Sap Lake. Imagine the scene. A bustling construction site without the modern conveniences of cranes or bulldozers. We're talking pure, unadulterated manpower here. The sandstone blocks, each weighing up to 1.5 tons, were quarried 50 kilometers away from Mount Killen. They were then floated down the Siem Reap River like a prehistoric game of Tetris, requiring serious logistical finesse. It's a bit like trying to build a skyscraper with a pocketful of toothpicks and a prayer. The fact that they pulled this off without collapsing under the weight of their ambition is nothing short of miraculous. But let's not get too carried away with romantic notions of divine inspiration. The truth is, Angkor Wat was as much a testament to human endurance as it was to spiritual devotion. The workers who toiled day and night were not exactly volunteers at a spiritual retreat. Many were conscripted laborers, working under the relentless Cambodian sun, chiseling intricate carvings that still dazzle the eye today. The romanticized image of a divine calling often glosses over the harsh reality. This was grueling, back-breaking work. It's like when you hear about the pyramids and think, wow, what a wonder, but forget the sweat and toil of the countless workers who actually did the heavy lifting. Speaking of lifting, let's talk about the hydraulic engineering that supported Angkor Wat and the surrounding city. This wasn't just any old temple complex. It was the center of a thriving metropolis that boasted one of the most sophisticated water management systems of its time. The Khmer engineers created an intricate network of barrays, large reservoirs, canals, and moats that not only supplied water for agriculture, but also prevented flooding, no small feat in a region prone to monsoons. This hydraulic wizardry allowed the city to flourish, turning it into the medieval equivalent of a bustling urban sprawl. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit like ancient urban planning, you'd be spot on. The Khmer were ahead of their time, using water management as a tool to support a growing population and fuel economic prosperity. It's like they were playing Sim City while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to upgrade from huts to houses. But unlike a video game, there was no reset button. The success of this system was vital for the survival of the empire. They had to get it right, or face the wrath of nature, a reminder that even the grandest civilizations are at the mercy of the elements. Yet, for all its architectural genius, Angkor Wat also served as a massive political statement. It was King Roman II way of saying, "Look what I can do," a colossal flex of resources and power. By dedicating the temple to Vishnu, the king was aligning himself with the divine, reinforcing his claim as the God King. This wasn't just about spirituality. It was an assertion of authority, a way to unify the empire under a singular vision. It's a bit like a modern-day leader building a giant skyscraper with their name on it, part ego, part legacy. But let's not get too cynical. There is something undeniably awe-inspiring about Angkor Wat. The sheer scale and detail of the carvings depicting scenes from Hindu mythology are a testament to the artistic and cultural heights the Khmer achieved. It's a reminder that while the empire was built on the backs of its people, it was also a civilization that valued art, culture, and the pursuit of the divine. As we leave the shadow of Angkor Wat, it's clear that this architectural marvel is more than just a relic of the past. It's a symbol of the Khmer Empire's ambition, ingenuity, and complexity. A civilization that dared to dream big and dig even bigger. And while we've only scratched the surface, rest assured there's more to uncover as we continue to explore the rise and fall of one of history's most fascinating empires. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. As we wave goodbye to the architectural grandeur of Angkor Wat, let's take a detour into the bustling life of the Khmer Empire's social fabric. Picture an empire where the elite were feasting on the medieval equivalent of caviar, while the common folks were toiling away under the blazing Cambodian sun. If that sounds like a tale as old as time, it's because social stratification is one of those persistent human habits that refuses to go out of style. The Khmer Empire's social hierarchy was a veritable pyramid scheme, minus the get-rich-quick promises. At the top, you had the guard kings and their noble entourage, enjoying the kind of opulence that would make a modern billionaire blush. These guys weren't just sipping on fine wines, they were ruling vast lands, surrounded by an entourage of priests, officials, and warriors. Their residences were sprawling complexes, likely filled with art, luxury, and the occasional elephant stroll. Think lifestyles of the rich and famous, but with more incense and fewer paparazzi. But let's not get too swept away by this lavish lifestyle. The glittering life of the elite was built on the backs of a vast workforce. Enter the commoners, farmers, laborers, and artisans who made up the backbone of the empire. These unsung heroes were the ones responsible for producing the empire's rice bonanza, constructing its architectural wonders, and crafting the intricate carvings that still adorn Angkor Wat today. They were the silent majority, working tirelessly in the fields and quarries, toiling under conditions that would make a modern labor union cry foul. Yet, despite their hard lives, the commoners were integral to the empire's success. They were the cogs in the grand machine that was the Khmer economy, producing the agricultural surplus that allowed the empire to thrive. And while the romanticized image of a harmonious society might suggest otherwise, primary sources like the inscriptions on temple walls reveal a society rife with tension and disparity. It's a reminder that even the most dazzling civilizations have their shadows. Now, let's talk religion, which in the Khmer Empire was like the ultimate multi-tool, shaping governance, culture, and everyday life. The empire was a spiritual melting pot, blending Hinduism and Buddhism in a way that would make a fusion chef proud. This wasn't just a casual dalliance with deities. It was a full-blown affair. The God Kings declared themselves divine in a move that was both strategic and spiritual. By aligning themselves with Hindu gods like Vishnu and Shiva, they reinforced their authority and legitimacy. It was part divine right, part political savvy, a mix that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. But as the empire evolved, so did its religious landscape. Buddhism began to play a more prominent role, gradually supplanting Hinduism as the dominant faith. This shift wasn't just about a change in devotional practices. It had tangible effects on governance and culture. The temples, once dedicated to Hindu deities, began to reflect Buddhist iconography and ideals. This religious transition mirrored the empire's adaptability and openness to cultural exchange, a flexibility that was key to its longevity. The role of religion in everyday life was pervasive. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were the hubs of community life, centers of learning, and symbols of the empire's wealth and power. The serene carvings on temple walls depicting scenes from Hindu epics or the life of Buddha were like ancient comic strips, delivering moral lessons and cultural narratives to the masses. Yet behind these serene facades, the realities were often less idyllic. The construction of these religious monuments was a monumental task that demanded resources and labor on a massive scale, underscoring the stark social disparities. In this context, religion wasn't just a spiritual pursuit. It was a tool of statecraft, a means to unify diverse tribes under a common banner. It was the glue that held the empire together, providing a shared cultural framework that transcended local identities. This blending of politics and religion created a unique cultural tapestry that defined the Khmer Empire, a civilization where the divine and the earthly were inextricably linked. So, as we peel back the layers of history, it's clear that the Khmer Empire was a complex organism, a society where divine kings and common laborers each played their part in a grand historical drama. The empire's social structure, religious practices, and economic might were all interconnected, creating a civilization that was both magnificent and deeply flawed. And while we've only scratched the surface of this intricate tapestry, there's plenty more to unravel as we continue our exploration of the Khmer Empire's rise and fall. Stay tuned for more insights into the fascinating world of the Khmers, where history and myth collide in a spectacular dance. As we peel back yet another layer of the Khmer Empire, we find ourselves at a turning point, a moment when the empire's seemingly unassailable grandeur began to show some rather unflattering cracks. Spoiler alert, we're not talking about an overnight implosion or some cosmic catastrophe. Nope, the decline of the Khmer Empire was more of a slow burn, like a candle melting down over centuries, not a firework fizzling out in seconds. First up, let's talk climate, because Mother Nature had some serious mood swings around the 13th century. The region faced a series of severe droughts interspersed with intense monsoons. Imagine trying to grow rice in what was essentially nature's version of a chaotic sprinkler system. These climate hiccups wreaked havoc on the agricultural backbone of the empire. And for a civilization that thrived on its rice production, this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was like watching the foundation of your house slowly sink into quicksand. The Khmer's once ingenious water management system, their pride and joy, started to show its age. While the reservoirs and canals had been a marvel of engineering, they weren't exactly designed to handle such extreme weather variations. You could say they were the ancient equivalent of those flashy tech gadgets that work great until you spill a little water on them. The Khmers faced an engineering conundrum: adapt or perish. Unfortunately, their once reliable system became more of a liability, turning once fertile lands into marshy quagmires or bone-dry patches. While the empire's agricultural lifeline was fraying, the economic landscape wasn't exactly throwing a parade either. The Silk Road, a bustling artery of trade, was shifting its focus, and maritime routes were becoming the new hotness. Picture the Khmer Empire as a bustling highway diner that suddenly finds itself bypassed by a shiny new interstate. Trade, which had brought wealth and exotic goods into the empire, began to dwindle. As merchants and traders took their business elsewhere, the Khmer economy felt the pinch. This wasn't a death knell, but it certainly didn't help an empire already weathering nature's wrath. In the realm of politics, things were just as turbulent. The empire faced internal dissent and external threats with equal fervor. The guard kings were no longer the unchallenged demigods they once were, and internal power struggles were as common as monsoon rains. Infighting among the nobility and succession disputes chipped away at the centralized power. Imagine a political game of musical chairs, but with more spears and fewer rules. It was a classic case of political drama that would have made Shakespeare proud. Externally, the Khmer weren't exactly the best neighbors on the block. As the empire strained under its own weight, it faced relentless pressure from neighboring kingdoms like the Champa and the emerging powers in what are now Thailand and Vietnam. These were no friendly neighborhood disputes over lawn ornaments. They were full-blown conflicts that drained resources and morale. Warfare was less about glorious conquest and more about a desperate attempt to hold onto what they had. And as history teaches us, few empires can sustain such continuous conflict without eventually faltering. Now, let's bust a myth that makes for a great story but a lousy historical account: the notion of a sudden, catastrophic collapse. Contrary to some popular narratives, there wasn't a single dramatic event that toppled the Khmer Empire like a Jenga tower struck by a rogue elbow. No fiery destruction, no mass exodus. Instead, the decline was a drawn-out affair, a slow erosion of power and influence over decades, even centuries. It's like watching a blockbuster movie in slow motion, except the plot is more about bureaucratic malaise than heroic last stands. The Khmer Empire's decline is a testament to the fact that even the mightiest civilizations are vulnerable to the same forces that affect us all: nature's whims, economic shifts, and human ambition. It's a reminder that behind the grand temples and epic tales lies a more sobering truth. Empires are built by people, and like all human endeavors, they are subject to the unpredictable dance of history. As we trace the fall of the Khmer Empire, it becomes clear that this wasn't just a localized phenomenon, but part of a larger pattern. Civilizations rise and fall, often slowly, sometimes spectacularly, shaped by the same forces that played out in Angkor: environmental change, economic realignment, and political entropy. It's a narrative as old as humanity itself, a reminder that the past isn't just a dusty relic, but a mirror reflecting the complexities of our own world. So, as we leave the embattled Khmer Empire grappling with its challenges, remember that this is not the end of the story. The echoes of Angkor resonate through history, offering lessons and insights for those willing to listen. The story continues, and there's plenty more to explore as we delve deeper into the rise and fall of one of history's most fascinating empires. Stay tuned, because there's still much more to uncover in this grand historical saga. From the shadows of the Khmer Empire's decline, let's fast forward a few centuries to the moment when Angkor Wat, that stone mausoleum of human ambition, was rediscovered in the 19th century. Imagine the scene. French explorer Henry Mauhat, traipsing through the Cambodian jungle in 1860, stumbles upon the sprawling ruins of Angkor. His reaction? Pure astonishment, as if he'd found Atlantis itself. Mauhat famously likened Angkor Wat to the pyramids of Egypt, but with more greenery and fewer camels. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a revelation that kicked off a renewed Western fascination with the East, a kind of archaeological gold rush with Angkor as the crown jewel. Before Mauhart's jungle escapades, Angkor Wat had been quietly sitting there, gradually reclaimed by nature's relentless appetite. Trees had woven themselves through the stonework like nature's own graffiti artists, adding a touch of organic artistry to the ancient masonry. This jungle-clad mystery only amplified the allure, wrapping Angkor Wat in a cloak of romantic decay that would charm explorers, historians, and tourists alike for generations to come. But let's not get too swept away by the allure of a forgotten paradise. The reality was that Angkor had never truly been lost to the locals. The Khmer people had always known about their ancient heritage, even if the world had temporarily turned its back. Mauhart's rediscovery was a catalyst, sparking a wave of archaeological curiosity and scholarly debate. Western scholars flocked to Angkor, eager to study its secrets and reconstruct its glorious past. It was as if Angkor Wat had become the ancient world's latest celebrity, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. Yet, amidst the scholarly excitement, there was also a darker undercurrent. Colonial powers were scrambling to stake their claim on Southeast Asia, and the rediscovery of Angkor Wat played right into their hands, serving as both a cultural trophy and a tool of soft power. As the dust settled on colonial ambitions, Angkor Wat found itself at the center of a new cultural narrative, one where Cambodia sought to reclaim its heritage and identity. Fast forward to 1992, when Angkor was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This was a pivotal moment, marking Angkor's official recognition as a cultural treasure of global significance. It was like the ancient temple had received a Lifetime Achievement Award, solidifying its status as a symbol of national pride and an icon of Khmer ingenuity. Yet, with great fame comes great responsibility, and modern-day Cambodia faces the daunting task of preserving this ancient marvel while navigating the treacherous waters of tourism. Angkor Wat attracts over 2 million visitors annually, each one eager to snap that perfect selfie amidst its sacred stones. This influx of tourists brings both economic opportunities and preservation challenges. On one hand, tourism is a vital economic lifeline for Cambodia, providing jobs and revenue in a country still healing from a turbulent past. On the other hand, the sheer volume of foot traffic poses a threat to the site's fragile integrity, as the relentless tide of visitors takes its toll on the ancient structures. Preservation efforts are a delicate balancing act, requiring a blend of modern technology and traditional craftsmanship. It's a bit like trying to restore a priceless painting that everyone wants to touch. You need to keep it pristine while ensuring it remains accessible to the public. The Cambodian government, along with international organizations, is working tirelessly to protect Angkor for future generations, employing everything from laser scanning to stone-by-stone reconstruction. It's a testament to the enduring legacy of the Khmer Empire, a civilization that once harnessed the power of water and stone now finds itself harnessing the power of global collaboration. But as we ponder Angkor's future, we must also reflect on its past. The ruins of Angkor Wat are more than just a tourist attraction. They are a poignant reminder of the heights of human achievement and the inevitable passage of time. They speak to the resilience of a people who have faced adversity and emerged with their culture intact. And if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the greatest legacies are not built solely on stone, but on the stories and spirit of the people who endure. Angkor Wat remains a siren call for adventurers and dreamers, a place where the echoes of ancient grandeur mingle with the modern world's hustle and bustle. It's a living testament to the Khmer Empire's ambition, a place where myth and reality intertwine, inviting us to explore its mysteries and learn from its lessons. In the end, Angkor Wat is more than just a relic of a bygone era. It is a bridge between the past and the present, a symbol of humanity's eternal quest to leave a mark on the world. And as the sun sets over its majestic silhouette, casting long shadows across its time-worn stones, we are reminded that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to what can be. If you were to hop in a time machine and punch in Mesoamerica, circa 250 AD, you'd land smack dab in the middle of a civilization that was busy building more than just towering stone structures. The Mayans were crafting an empire that would leave Indiana Jones types and armchair historians drooling for centuries to come. Now, before you start picturing the Mayans as some ancient, bloodthirsty cult obsessed with pyramids and sacrifices, let's dial down the drama. The truth is, these folks were much more than their Hollywood portrayal. First off, let's chat geography. The Mayan civilization stretched across what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. That's roughly 300,000 square kilometers, or for those who think in terms of football fields, that's about 42 million of them. This isn't just some backwater region. We're talking lush rainforests, mountainous highlands, and sprawling lowlands. It's like Mother Nature threw a little bit of everything into this part of the world just to keep things interesting, and the Mayans thrived there for good reason. The fascination with Mayan architecture often starts with their awe-inspiring temples and pyramids. These weren't just buildings, they were statements. The Mayans were showcasing their engineering prowess long before cranes and bulldozers were a thing. Take the Temple of the Great Jaguar in Tikal, for example. Standing at about 47 meters high, it's the kind of skyscraper that would make even the modern-day urban developer raise an eyebrow. And while the Burj Khalifa might win in a height contest, it doesn't have the same air of mystery or historical heft. Now, let's get something straight. The Mayans didn't just build these temples to flex their architectural muscles. These structures were central to their religious and social life. The Mayan world wasn't all about practicalities. They had a thing for the celestial. Their pyramids often doubled as observatories, with steps and platforms aligned to track the sun, moon, and stars. It's like a Stone Age planetarium, but with a lot more stone and a little less popcorn. Here's a kicker. While the Mayan culture is often painted with a brush dipped in sacrificial blood, the truth is far richer and, frankly, less gruesome. Sure, they did engage in human sacrifice. It was kind of a thing back then, like disco in the 70s. However, the Mayans were also mathematical wizards, astronomers, and artists. They gave us the concept of zero, which, believe it or not, was a pretty big deal. Try doing your taxes without zero and see how far you get. Speaking of myths, you might have heard tales of the Mayans as a civilization obsessed with building their cities purely for sacrificial ceremonies. It's a juicy story, but it's not the whole truth. In reality, their cities were bustling hubs of trade and society. They were like ancient versions of Wall Street, but with more stone and fewer stockbrokers. The Mayans were trading everything from cacao to jade, and their markets were as vibrant as their art. When it comes to art, the Mayans weren't just doodling on stone. Their artwork was intricate and symbolic, telling stories of gods, rulers, and the cosmos. Mayan glyphs are a testament to their sophisticated writing system, a blend of logograms and syllabic symbols that scholars are still deciphering today. It's like a Rosetta Stone, but with a lot more flair and fewer hieroglyphs of cats. Now, if you think the Mayans were just ancient architects with a penchant for pyramids, you'd be missing the bigger picture. Their society was complex, with city-states like Tikal, Kapan, and Pagan each having their own kings, political intrigues, and yes, even the occasional war. But unlike the modern-day political brawls, these wars were often more about capturing prisoners for prestige rather than annihilating the enemy. Think of it as a more personal, albeit brutal, game of chess. So, what can we learn from these ancient builders? For starters, the Mayans remind us that architecture isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about culture, religion, and identity. Their cities were more than places to live. They were reflections of their worldviews and technological prowess. In a way, the Mayan pyramids stand as silent sentinels of a civilization that, despite its eventual decline, left an indelible mark on history. In the grand tapestry of human civilization, the Mayans were the original overachievers. They remind us that even in the midst of jungles, with no modern tools, people can create wonders that not only stand the test of time, but also leave future generations in awe. So the next time you gaze at a modern skyscraper, take a moment to tip your hat to the Mayans, those ancient architects who built their dreams in stone, one step at a time, and without the help of a single crane. So, onward we go, diving headfirst into the gritty details of Mayan construction that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer break a sweat. While today's architects might spend years learning to design a simple bridge, the Mayans were out there in the jungle, assembling architectural wonders with nothing more than rudimentary tools and sheer determination. Forget about the wheel, because the Mayans didn't even use one. Imagine transporting massive limestone blocks without it. It's like building a skyscraper using only a Swiss Army knife and a dream. These stones, some weighing more than your average family car, were quarried from local sources. Limestone was the material of choice, thanks to its abundance and relative softness, which made it easier to carve. But don't be fooled. Easier is a relative term here. Carving these stones was like trying to sculpt a marble statue with a carrot peeler. Once shaped, they were transported to construction sites by sheer human willpower, using logs as rollers or sheer manpower with ropes and wooden sledges. If IKEA ever manufactured a flat-pack pyramid, the Mayans would have been the folks to assemble it. And speaking of labor, let's talk workforce. The construction of these architectural marvels wasn't just a job. It was a massive communal effort, fueled by a cocktail of religion, politics, and social obligation. Forget your 9-to-5 with benefits. This was more like a lifelong commitment to the gods and the state. Thousands of workers, often conscripted from conquered territories, were involved in these projects. And they weren't just grunts hauling stone. There were skilled artisans, architects, and planners all orchestrating this symphony of stone and sweat. While we're on the topic of labor, it's worth noting that this wasn't exactly a workers' utopia. The labor force was primarily made up of commoners who didn't have much of a say in the matter. They were driven by the promise of religious favor and social prestige, or perhaps just the fear of a ruler's wrath. Imagine being promised a spot in the afterlife or a better harvest if you managed to lug one more hefty stone up the side of a pyramid. It's like being offered eternal happiness in exchange for building Rome in a day. But why go to all this trouble? The answer lies in the Mayan worldview, where religion and politics were as intertwined as a pair of earbuds left in your pocket. The Mayans believed that their temples were not just places of worship, but direct conduits to the gods. Building these structures was akin to establishing a hotline to the divine. The higher the temple, the closer to the heavens, and the better the connection. It's like upgrading your data plan for clearer calls, only with more spirituality and less customer service. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. These construction projects weren't just about spiritual enlightenment. They were also about showcasing power and wealth. Each city-state was in a constant game of one-upmanship, trying to outdo their neighbors with bigger and more elaborate structures. If you think keeping up with the Joneses is hard, try keeping up with the Palanks and Tikals. The temples were status symbols, reflecting the city's prosperity and the ruler's ability to command both resources and people. But wait, there's more. The economic implications of these projects were significant. The construction of a pyramid was a massive economic engine, driving trade and commerce. Resources had to be sourced, food had to be provided for the workers, and tools had to be crafted. This bustling economic activity stimulated local economies, creating a ripple effect that benefited traders, artisans, and farmers alike. It was the ancient equivalent of a massive public works project, boosting the economy while also serving the divine. Yet, with all this grandeur, it's critical to remember that the Mayan society, much like any other, had its flaws. The heavy reliance on manual labor and the sheer scale of these projects placed enormous strain on resources and people. It's a classic tale of ambition meeting reality, where the pursuit of greatness sometimes overshadows the human cost. The Mayans, like many civilizations before them, were masters of stone, but not always of sustainability. In the end, the Mayan construction techniques reveal not just an impressive achievement in engineering and architecture, but a complex tapestry of social, economic, and religious motivations. They remind us that behind every stone laid, there was a story of human endeavor, belief, and often sacrifice. As we marvel at their achievements, let's not forget the sweat, toil, and dreams that built them. The Mayans, in their quest to touch the heavens, left behind more than stone structures. They left lessons in ambition, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. And with that, we continue our journey through the Mayan world, where the stones speak of ancient dreams and the jungle whispers of forgotten stories. As we move forward, let's keep unearthing the truths buried beneath the myths, one stone at a time. As we delve deeper into the Mayan world, let's pivot into the political and religious intricacies that turned their architectural masterpieces into more than just stone wonders. They were the original power stations of authority and divine influence. We're talking about structures that weren't just keeping the rain out and the spirits in. They were the beating heart of Mayan society's political machine. These temples and pyramids were like the Apple headquarters of their time, minus the sleek glass walls and the constant product launches. Instead, they launched influence, power, and the occasional sacrificial ceremony. First off, picture the Mayan temples as the ultimate flex of power and piety. These weren't your average community centers where people gathered for weekend bingo. They were grand stages where rulers and priests played out the cosmic drama of life, death, and everything in between. Rulers didn't just declare their divine right to rule, they engraved it in stone. Literally. Hieroglyphs carved into temples often chronicled the achievements of kings, depicting them as semi-divine figures who brokered deals with the cosmos. These stories were not just tales of heroism, but strategic propaganda. If you can convince your subjects that the sun rises because you asked it to, you've got yourself a pretty solid gig. Now, let's not forget the priests. The real power players lurking in the shadows. They were the ones who interpreted the stars, conducted rituals, and whispered into the ears of kings. Think of them as the original behind-the-scenes advisors, the political strategists with a hotline to the gods. Priests held the keys to both the spiritual and earthly realms. They managed the sacred calendars, which dictated everything from agricultural cycles to war times. That's right. Want to know when it's a good time to invade a neighboring city-state? Better consult the priestly calendar, my friend, because the stars have a say in your military strategy. These temples were also the socio-political epicenters where the ruling elite consolidated power. Hosting ceremonies that were part religious spectacle, part political theater, rulers and priests would gather the populace for rituals that often involved a little bloodletting. It's a harsh reality, but these ceremonies underscored the ruler's divine authority and the citizens' role in the cosmic balance. Human sacrifice, while grisly, was a powerful tool for maintaining control. It was like the Mayan version of a corporate retreat, only with higher stakes and a more permanent agenda. And let's talk economics, because nothing says power like controlling the purse strings. The construction and maintenance of these grand edifices required a massive resource influx. Think labor, materials, and food. Control over these resources meant control over the cities. The ruling elite could dictate who got what, when, and how much. This wasn't just about building temples. It was about building networks of loyalty and dependency. If you control the flow of jade, cacao, and obsidian, key trade goods, you control the flow of power. The temples weren't just static structures. They played dynamic roles in the economy as well. They served as marketplaces where trade goods were exchanged, where artisans could showcase their wares, and where farmers could barter their produce. In a way, these religious centers doubled as early stock exchanges, minus the frantic yelling and ticker tape. The goods traded here were not just material but symbolic, reinforcing the temple's role as a nexus of economic and spiritual life. While we're on the subject of trade, it's worth mentioning the Mayans' extensive trade routes that spanned Mesoamerica. These routes brought in goods and ideas from afar, making the Mayan cities vibrant melting pots of culture and commerce. Temples served as landmarks and waypoints along these routes, guiding traders and pilgrims alike. They were beacons of civilization in the dense jungle, drawing people in with the promise of prosperity and divine favor. Speaking of divine favor, let's not underestimate the psychological impact of these towering structures. Imagine standing at the base of a massive pyramid, its peak shrouded in mist, knowing that it was built to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. It's a humbling experience, one that reinforces the power of the rulers who commissioned it. These temples were not just stone and mortar. They were symbols of the cosmic order, with the king at its center. It's a classic case of using architecture to awe and inspire, a tactic still used by world leaders today when they construct grandiose buildings to house their governments. But here's the kicker. While the Mayans built their temples as eternal monuments to their civilization, they also inadvertently set the stage for their decline. The immense resources poured into these projects strained their society. The constant need to outdo rival city-states led to overexploitation of resources, deforestation, and environmental degradation. It's a tale as old as civilization itself, ambition outpacing sustainability, a lesson still unlearned in many modern contexts. In conclusion, as we stand amidst the ruins of these once mighty structures, we see not just the remnants of an architectural feat, but the echoes of a society that lived, thrived, and struggled beneath their shadows. These temples and pyramids tell stories of power plays, religious fervor, and economic machinations. They are the silent witnesses to human ambition and the unending quest for meaning and control. As we continue our journey through the Mayan world, let's keep unraveling the threads of this complex tapestry, a civilization that sought to carve its name into eternity, one stone at a time. As we stand amidst the ruins of these once mighty structures, let's pivot from the political intrigues and economic machinations of the Mayans to another area where they truly shone: astronomy. Now, before your eyes glaze over at the thought of star charts and celestial geometry, let me assure you, the Mayans were the OG stargazers who could put some modern astronomers to shame. They weren't just watching the sky for kicks. They were tracking the cosmos with a precision that would make NASA nod in appreciation. The Mayans didn't have fancy telescopes or space probes, but what they did have was an uncanny ability to watch the heavens and discern patterns that were more reliable than your daily horoscope. Take the temple at Chichen Itza, for example, where El Castillo, or the Temple of Kukulkan, stands like a stone calculator, calibrated to the movements of the sun. Pyramid is famous for the descent of the serpent phenomenon, where during the equinoxes, the sun casts shadows that create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the staircase. It's a light show that doesn't require electricity, just the earth, sun, and a bit of human ingenuity. These temples weren't just impressive backdrops for celestial drama. They were the Mayans' version of a Swiss watch. They used them to measure time with a level of accuracy that would make a Rolex envious. The observatories at Uxmal and Kapan were not just random heaps of stone. They were aligned with the cardinal directions and celestial events. Mayan priests would climb these temples, not just to get a better view of the stars, but to interpret the divine messages written across the night sky. Let's talk numbers, because the Mayans were all about the digits. Their calendar system was a marvel of mathematical precision. The Mayan calendar comprises several cycles, with the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, and the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, interlocking like gears in a clock. Together, they form the calendar round, a 52-year cycle that kept time with a precision that makes our Gregorian calendar look like a rough draft. And remember, these calculations were done without the aid of a single abacus or calculator app. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the irony. The Mayans were mapping celestial movements with astounding accuracy, while some of us today still struggle to read an analog clock. We've got smartphones that can pinpoint our location within a few meters, yet the ancient Mayans were charting Venus's path with nothing but keen observation and a knack for numbers. They tracked the planet's cycle with such precision that they could predict its position within a mere 2 hours over a 584-day cycle. That's right. These ancient astronomers could track a planet's orbit more accurately than some of us can keep track of our car keys. While we're debunking myths, let's tackle the one about the Mayan calendar predicting the apocalypse in 2012. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The infamous end date was merely the end of a cycle, akin to flipping the calendar from December to January. The Mayans were less about doomsday prophecies and more about understanding the universe's cyclical nature. They recognized time as a series of repeating patterns, much like the seasons, or, let's be real, the reboot cycles of Hollywood. The Mayans' astronomical prowess wasn't just about looking up at the stars. It was about using that knowledge to navigate earthly challenges. Their understanding of the cosmos was deeply intertwined with agriculture and politics. The timing of planting and harvesting crops was synchronized with celestial cycles, ensuring that their agricultural practices were as efficient as possible. This wasn't just farming, it was farming with a cosmic twist, where the stars dictated the rhythm of life. Of course, the Mayans' obsession with celestial patterns wasn't purely practical. It was also deeply spiritual. They saw the cosmos as a grand theater where gods played out cosmic dramas that directly impacted their lives. The temple observatories were sacred spaces where priests would conduct rituals to interpret celestial messages, making them spiritual hubs as well as scientific ones. It's a classic example of how science and religion, often seen as opposing forces, were seamlessly woven together in Mayan society. Yet, for all their achievements, the Mayans remind us of the delicate balance between understanding and hubris. Their astronomical observations were so advanced that they might have believed they could control or predict everything, from weather patterns to political fortunes. But, as history has shown, even the most meticulous planning can't account for every variable. Climate change, resource depletion, and internal strife eventually contributed to the civilization's decline, a poignant lesson that even the most star-studded plans can falter. As we continue our exploration of the Mayan world, let's keep in mind the duality of their achievements. They were a civilization that gazed at the stars with awe and reverence, interpreting cosmic patterns with a precision that still inspires admiration today. Yet, they were also a society bound by earthly constraints, where the relentless pursuit of knowledge and grandeur sometimes led to their own undoing. Their temples stand as testaments to both human ingenuity and the timeless dance between ambition and reality. So, as we prepare to delve into the next chapter of Mayan history, let's keep our eyes on the skies and our feet on the ground, ever mindful of the lessons etched in stone and starlight. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal in this fascinating journey through time. Stay tuned for the cosmic revelations yet to come as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of the Mayan civilization, one celestial observation at a time. And so, as we transition from Mayan astronomical prowess to the twilight of their civilization, let's take a deep breath and dive into the gritty details of their decline. Spoiler alert. It's not as simple as one bad harvest or a single misguided king. The fall of the Mayan civilization was a slow-motion train wreck with multiple drivers, each steering into a different kind of chaos. First, let's talk environment. The Mayans were playing a high-stakes game of ecological Jenga, and eventually the whole thing toppled over. Remember those lush rainforests and bountiful lands we mentioned earlier? Well, the Mayans did what many civilizations have done. They got a little too comfortable and started pushing the limits. Deforestation was the order of the day, as trees were chopped down for fuel, construction, and agriculture. It's the classic human tale, take, until there's nothing left to give. As the forests disappeared, so did the topsoil, leading to diminished crop yields. The Mayans depended heavily on maize, and when your main source of sustenance starts to dwindle, you've got yourself a recipe for disaster, or at least a very empty pantry. Add to that a few severe droughts, and you've got a civilization teetering on the brink. Droughts weren't just a minor inconvenience. They were like Mother Nature's way of reminding the Mayans who was really in charge. Without rain, their sophisticated water management systems became elaborate but useless relics. Then there's the social fabric, which was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. The Mayan civilization was not a unified empire, but a collection of city-states, each with its own ruler and agenda. This led to constant skirmishes, as each city-state tried to outshine the other, not just with ornate temples, but with military might. It's like a never-ending game of Risk, except the stakes were much higher than bragging rights. Internal conflict drained resources and further destabilized an already wobbling social structure. But it wasn't just external pressures. There were internal cracks, too. The rigid class system meant that the ruling elite lived in opulence while the commoners toiled under the hot sun. If that sounds familiar, it's because history loves to repeat itself. When resources became scarce, the elite continued their lavish ways, oblivious to the struggles of the masses. Eventually, resentment boiled over, leading to uprisings and the collapse of the elite's grip on power. It's a tale as old as time. When the scales of social justice tip too far, they have a nasty habit of swinging back. Now, let's not paint the Mayans as hapless victims of circumstance. They were a resourceful, intelligent people who made incredible contributions to human knowledge. But like many great civilizations, they fell victim to their own success. Their achievements in architecture, astronomy, and agriculture created a society that thrived, until it didn't. The lesson here: sometimes your greatest strengths can also be your greatest vulnerabilities. Fast forward to today, and the ruins of the Mayan temples and pyramids still draw crowds of tourists, history buffs, and the occasional conspiracy theorist. There's something undeniably romantic about walking among ancient stones, imagining the lives that unfolded there. Yet, as we marvel at these architectural wonders, it's crucial to remember the human cost, the societal missteps, and the environmental lessons that echo through the ages. The modern fascination with the Mayans is fueled by a mix of awe and a touch of schadenfreude. We admire their brilliance, but also find a strange comfort in their downfall. It's a reminder that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it's never immune to collapse. The Mayans teach us that sustainability isn't just a buzzword, it's a necessity. Their story is a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition outpaces resources, and when the quest for greatness eclipses the basics of survival. Their legacy, however, isn't just a series of warnings. It's also a reminder of human ingenuity. The Mayans built cities that rose from the jungle, stone by stone, without modern conveniences. They mapped the stars and created art that continues to captivate us. Their glyphs and carvings tell stories of gods, kings, and the cosmos, inviting us to explore not just their history, but our own place in the grand narrative of humanity. So, as we wrap up our journey through the world of the Mayans, let's carry forward the lessons they left behind. They remind us that while civilizations rise and fall, the human spirit endures, driven by the same forces that built pyramids and charted the stars. In the end, the Mayans were not just architects of stone, but architects of ideas, ideas that continue to resonate, challenge, and inspire us today. In the grand tapestry of history, the Mayan civilization is a vibrant, intricate thread. It speaks of triumph and tragedy, of human potential and folly. As we stand on the shoulders of these ancient giants, their whispers echo through time, urging us to learn from their story. Because, let's face it, nobody wants to be the next civilization that crumbles under its own weight. So, let's heed history's call, embracing both its romance and reality, and strive to build a future that honors the lessons of the past. The Victorian era, where even your morning had the potential to be an adventure, just without the convenient spin cycle of modern life. You're a nurse in 19th century London, and as you wriggle out of your narrow bed, you're greeted not by birdsong, but by the distant rumble of carts and the occasional shout of a street vendor. The air is a blend of coal, smoke, sewage, and fish, London's unofficial cologne. It's 1862. Florence Nightingale is the talk of the town, and you're part of a burgeoning profession that's just starting to shake off its image problem. Your morning routine is more brisk than luxurious. There's no time for lounging when you've got a city to heal. Forget about a hot shower. A basin of cold water will do the trick, and let's just say soap is more of a suggestion than a staple. Breakfast is a quick affair, perhaps some oatmeal if you're lucky. You've got to get those calories in, because the rest of your day might involve carting around patients and dodging chamber parts being emptied from second-story windows. Yes, that's a real hazard. Keep your head on a swivel, my friend. As you step out onto the cobblestones, the romance of Victorian London quickly evaporates. The streets are narrow, crowded, and downright filthy. Horse-drawn carriages trundle by, leaving behind gifts of manure. The Thames, that iconic river, is more of a liquid landfill than a charming waterway. Cholera outbreaks are as common as bad weather forecasts, and sanitation is, well, more of a future aspiration than a current reality. Your walk to the hospital is a crash course in the economic disparities of the era. You pass grand townhouses that scream opulence, complete with liveried servants and gas lamps, and just around the corner, there's a slum where people live 10 to a room. It's a Dickensian contrast that's as stark as it is sobering. Welcome to Victorian London, where the streets are paved with, let's call it potential. Now, let's talk about your workplace, probably a hospital like St. Thomas's, where Florence Nightingale herself made history. The nursing profession in the 1800 was undergoing a transformation, largely thanks to Nightingale's efforts. Before her, nursing was seen as a job for the uneducated, a last resort rather than a calling. But Nightingale, armed with statistics, changed all that. The lady with the lamp didn't just shine light on patients. She illuminated the need for sanitary conditions. Her work during the Crimean War slashed mortality rates from 42% to 2% by implementing hygiene practices that seem like common sense today, but were revolutionary back then. As a Victorian nurse, your toolkit includes bandages, rudimentary pain relief, and an iron will. You're expected to manage not just patient care, but often their food and laundry too. And let's not forget the hours. 12 to 14-hour shifts are the norm, and there's no such thing as overtime pay. The average wage, a meager £10 to £20 a year, barely enough to keep you afloat in a city where everything from bread to beer costs far more than it should. But what about those romanticized images of the Florence Nightingale-esque nurse, serenely caring for patients with a gentle touch and a kind smile? Sure, there's some truth to that, but it ignores the grit and grind that defines your daily hustle. You're dealing with overcrowded wards, where the air is thick with the smell of illness and disinfectant. The tools at your disposal are rudimentary, and the medical knowledge is still in its infancy. Germ theory is just taking hold, so while you might not be bleeding patients to balance their humors, the science isn't much more advanced. You're also part of a social revolution. The Industrial Revolution has turned society inside out, flooding cities with people and setting the stage for massive public health challenges. It's a time of both incredible progress and daunting problems. As you hustle down the street, dodging a particularly aggressive chicken that's escaped from a nearby stall, you're not just a nurse. You're a pioneer in a field that's learning to stand on its own 2 feet. So, there you are, navigating the gritty reality of a London that's as alive with potential as it is with disease. The romance of the Victorian era might be immortalized in literature and art, but you're living the unvarnished truth. It's a world where nurses like you are on the front lines, balancing hope and hardship with every step you take. And with that, you arrive at the hospital, ready to tackle whatever the day throws your way. Because in 19th century London, every day is a history lesson in the making. So, you've made it to the hospital, where the mid-morning sun barely penetrates the thick fog of coal smoke and the even thicker air of organized chaos. Welcome to the front line of Victorian healthcare, where the word sanitation is more of a whisper than a shout. Here, the sights and sounds are enough to make anyone question their career choices. Yet here you are, ready to tackle another day that's as unpredictable as a London weather forecast. As you step inside, the first thing that hits you is the smell. It's a potent cocktail of unwashed bodies, antiseptic, and something you'd rather not identify. It's a wonder any patient makes it out alive. But then again, that's what you're here for. The wards are crowded, beds jammed so close together that you can hardly squeeze between them. Patients are stacked like cordwood, each one suffering from a range of ailments that sound like they're straight out of a grim fairy tale. Consumption, typhus, diphtheria. It's a veritable who's who of 19th century maladies. Let's talk medical theories, shall we? It's the age of miasma, the belief that diseases are spread through bad air. Imagine thinking that a whiff of the Thames could do you in. Sure, it smells like a crime scene, but today we know it's the bacteria and viruses causing the trouble, not the stench itself. Back then, though, doctors were all about keeping the windows open to let in the good air, blissfully unaware that their hands, instruments, and sometimes even their clothes were the real culprits in spreading disease. You've also got the humors theory still clinging on like that one guest who doesn't know when to leave the party. According to this ancient idea, your health depends on the balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Feel a little off? Clearly your humors are out of whack. The solution? Bloodletting, of course, because nothing screams cure like draining a pint or 2 from the already anemic. It's a wonder anyone survived these medieval throwbacks, but hey, it was the science of the time. Now, let's dive into the gritty economic realities. You're a nurse pulling 12-hour shifts, and for what? A paltry annual salary of £10 to £20. That breaks down to less than £2 a month. Good luck stretching that to cover rent, food, and maybe the occasional pint to drown your sorrows. Meanwhile, the cost of medical supplies is through the roof. A single leech, yes, they're still a thing, can set the hospital back a few shillings, while the cost of bandages and antiseptic is enough to make the accountants weep. It's a constant balancing act between necessity and budget, a game of financial Tetris where the blocks never seem to fit. Compare this to the opulent lifestyles of the upper crust, and it's enough to make your blood boil. Just don't let the doctors hear that, or they'll be reaching for the lancets. While you're scrimping and saving, the well-to-do are enjoying gaslit dinners and the latest in crinoline fashion. It's a stark reminder that the gap between rich and poor is as wide as the Thames and just as polluted. Inside the hospital, the idealized image of the Florence Nightingale-esque nurse is put to the test. Sure, you've got a lamp, but it's more for navigating the dark corridors than for angelic bedside vigils. The reality is a lot less serene and a lot more sweat-inducing. You're on your feet for hours, managing not only the medical needs of your patients, but also their meals and laundry. It's like running a one-person show with a cast of dozens, and there's no intermission. It's a time of transition, as germ theory starts to gain traction, nudging aside the older, less effective practices. Thanks to pioneers like Joseph Lister, antiseptics are slowly being introduced, leading to a significant drop in post-surgical infections. But change is slow, and old habits die hard. You find yourself on the front lines of this medical revolution, armed with little more than determination and perhaps a faint hope that tomorrow will be slightly less chaotic. Mid-morning in the hospital also means navigating the social dynamics. The doctors, mostly male and often from privileged backgrounds, hold the power, while nurses, predominantly female, do the grunt work. It's a microcosm of the larger societal structure, where gender roles are rigid and upward mobility is a distant dream. Yet, here you stand, part of a burgeoning profession that's slowly earning respect, thanks to the tireless efforts of individuals like Nightingale. Even in the midst of this chaos, there are moments that remind you why you chose this path. The grateful smile of a recovering patient, the camaraderie among fellow nurses, and the small victories in the battle against illness. These are the threads that weave together the fabric of your daily life, lending it color and meaning amid the gritty backdrop. As you navigate this whirlwind of activity, you're not just a participant in history, but an architect of its future. The changes you help implement, the care you provide, and the battles you fight against entrenched ideas are all part of a larger narrative that will shape the medical field for generations to come. And with that thought, you duck into the next ward, ready for whatever the day throws your way. Because in this world, stagnation is as deadly as any disease. And just like that, the clock ticks its way toward the most anticipated yet dreaded time of the day, lunch hour. This is the Victorian hospital's version of halftime, but instead of oranges and pep talks, you've got a cacophony of clattering dishes and a menu that reads like a dare. It's not exactly a Michelin-starred affair, more like Survivor, 19th century hospital edition, where the reward is not flavor, but simply the absence of food poisoning. So, what's on the menu today? If you're lucky, maybe some boiled mutton with a side of yesterday's bread. If the kitchen staff is feeling particularly generous, you might score a scoop of lumpy porridge. But let's be real, this is more about getting calories than culinary delight. The main course, a hot debate over whether the meat is actually fresher than the patients you're trying to save. Spoiler alert, it's a toss-up. Now, don't get too comfortable with your plate of questionable goodness. Lunch hour in this setting is a misnomer. It's more like a lunch 10 minutes, interrupted by the inevitable chaos of a bustling hospital. One moment you're mid-bite, the next, you're hauling yourself back to the wards, spoons still in hand, because Mr. So-and-so in bed 3 decided now was the perfect time for a medical emergency. And speaking of interruptions, let's navigate the social dynamics of this peculiar workplace, shall we? Victorian hospitals are like a reality show where the drama unfolds in starched aprons and tailcoats. The doctors, almost exclusively male and often puffed up with a sense of self-importance, hold the reins. They're the stars of this show, the ones who get the credit and the cigars. But it's you, the nurse, who's doing the heavy lifting, both metaphorically and literally. Gender roles are as rigid as the corsets you wear and the hierarchy. Oh, it's as steep as the climb to the top of Big Ben. Nurses, mostly women, are expected to be the epitome of virtue, modest, obedient, and ever dedicated. Society has painted a picture of you that's part angel, part martyr, but what they conveniently overlook is the back-breaking labor. The public perception of nursing is wrapped in a shroud of romanticism, but peel back that layer, and what do you find? Endless hours, low pay, and a job description that includes everything from nursing to housekeeping. Expectations. Let's talk about those. You're expected to be the embodiment of purity, a beacon of moral superiority in a world that's anything but. It's a role that's as much about performance as it is about proficiency. The pressure is intense, like trying to keep a straight face while your bowels revolt against the day's lunch. But there's no option to crack, not when the eyes of society and your superiors are ever watchful. And let's not forget the unspoken rule that you, as a woman, should be grateful for their opportunity to work outside the home. The reality is you're often just a step above the patients you care for on the social ladder. Yet you persist, because deep down, beneath the layers of fabric and the weight of expectation, lies a steely resolve. It's a resilience that's slowly but surely reshaping public perception, one patient at a time. Oh, but the myth of the nurse with a heart of gold is a hard one to shake. Popular literature paints you as Florence Nightingale reincarnate, a saint in a starched cap. But let's be honest, you're more like the Swiss Army knife of healthcare, versatile, indispensable, and perpetually overworked. The romanticized image overlooks the reality that you're also the one scrubbing floors and laundering linens in between tending to the sick. It's a role that demands more than just bedside manners. It calls for grit and a stomach strong enough to ignore the questionable stew served in the staff kitchen. Despite the rigid societal norms, change is afoot. The Crimean War may have ended, but its legacy lingers, challenging the status quo and pushing nursing to the forefront of the public eye. As Nightingale's reforms begin to take root, the profession is slowly gaining respect. Women like you are not just caregivers, but pioneers, laying the groundwork for what will eventually become modern nursing. It's a path paved with more than just intention. It's built on the sweat and sacrifice of those who came before, and those, like you, who continue the fight. In the midst of this upheaval, the hospital is a microcosm of broader societal change. The Industrial Revolution is shaking things up, bringing about shifts in class structure and economic opportunity. It's a time of reckoning, where the traditional roles of men and women are being questioned, albeit slowly. While the men in their frock coats may hold the titles, it's the women in white who are driving the real change, one patient and one shift at a time. In this world of stark contrasts, you find camaraderie among your fellow nurses. It's a sisterhood forged in the shared struggle of a profession that demands everything yet offers little in return. These are the bonds that sustain you, that remind you there is strength in numbers and in shared purpose. Together, you navigate the trials of the day, bolstered by the knowledge that you are part of something bigger than yourself. As the lunch hour, or what's left of it, draws to a close, you find yourself back on the ward, ready to dive once more into the fray. The afternoon promises its own set of challenges, but armed with determination and a touch of gallows humor, you're ready to face whatever comes next. Because in this world of grit and grime, you're not just surviving, you're blazing a trail for those who will follow. And that, dear friend, is a legacy worth every ounce of effort. And so you plunge back into the labyrinth of the hospital wards, where the afternoon sun doesn't so much shine as it does cast a judgmental glare through the grime-streaked windows. Welcome to the real heart of Victorian healthcare, overcrowded, underfunded, and just a tad too pungent for comfort. Here, privacy is a luxury, and hygiene is, shall we say, aspirational at best. Let's talk patient care, or what passes for it in this era. The wards are packed tighter than a sardine can, each bed occupied by someone wrestling with diseases that sound like they've been plucked straight out of a medical horror story. Tuberculosis, or consumption as it's poetically called, is the headliner, claiming victims with a cough that echoes like a death knell. If TB doesn't get you, maybe typhoid, cholera, or smallpox will. It's like a grim lottery where everyone's got a ticket. But what are the actual odds? Let's throw some numbers at you. By the mid-19th century, London's population had swollen to over 3 million. With that kind of density, infectious diseases spread like gossip at a Victorian tea party. Mortality rates for diseases like diphtheria and typhus hovered around 40%, and that's on a good day. Child mortality was especially brutal, with 1 in 5 not making it past their first birthday. Makes you grateful for vaccines, doesn't it? In this chaotic setting, the lack of privacy is palpable. Curtains are a rarity, and the concept of personal space is about as foreign as sushi. Imagine trying to convalesce while your neighbor in the next bed hacks up a lung or worse, succumbs to their ailments. It's a reminder that life here is as fragile as the paper-thin sheets covering the patients. But hey, at least you're never lonely, right? As you weave through the beds, you're struck by the sheer human tapestry on display. Patients from all walks of life, rich, poor, young, old, are thrown together in this melting pot of misery. There's a certain equality in suffering, it seems, though not all illnesses are created equal. The wealthy have the luxury of private doctors and better treatment, while the working class are left to fend for themselves in these overcrowded wards. If you ever needed a visual representation of the class divide, here it is, laid bare in all its grim glory. Now, let's burst a bubble or two about Victorian medicine. The myth of the all-knowing doctor is just that, a myth. Medical science during this period is like a toddler learning to walk, full of promise but prone to falling flat on its face. Surgical techniques are rudimentary, and anesthesia is still in its infancy. Ether and chloroform are the new kids on the block, but they're as likely to kill you as the surgery itself. And antiseptics, still a novelty, slowly making their way into practice thanks to trailblazers like Joseph Lister. Until then, surgery is a spectator sport, often performed in front of an audience, with the surgeon's skill measured by their speed rather than their precision. The lack of effective treatment options means that much of what passes for care is really just guesswork dressed up in a lab coat. Bloodletting is still in vogue, despite mountains of evidence suggesting it's about as effective as a chocolate teapot. The theory of humors might be on its last legs, but it's not going down without a fight, and many doctors are still clinging to it like a life raft in a sea of ignorance. Yet, amidst this quagmire of medical mediocrity, there are glimmers of progress. The germ theory of disease is slowly gaining traction, challenging the miasma theory that blames bad air for just about everything. It's a seismic shift in understanding, akin to discovering that the Earth isn't the center of the universe. But change is slow, and old habits die harder than a cockroach in a nuclear blast. As a nurse, you're at the coalface of this medical revolution, implementing the early practices that will eventually become the foundation of modern healthcare. Your work may not be glamorous, but it's vital. You're the unsung hero, the one who ensures that the basics, cleanliness, nutrition, and comfort, are not overlooked in the rush to cure the incurable. It's a role that requires patience and perseverance, qualities you have in spades. So, what impact does all this have on patient outcomes? Let's be real. Victorian medicine is hit and miss at best. For every life saved, there are countless others lost to infections, complications, and the sheer brutality of disease. However, the introduction of basic hygiene practices, championed by Florence Nightingale and her ilk, has started to tip the scales. Mortality rates in hospitals are slowly declining, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. But don't let this modest progress fool you. The road to modern medicine is long and winding, littered with the detritus of outdated practices and the egos of those who refuse to adapt. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that any progress is made at all, given the challenges faced by those on the front lines. As you move through the ward, checking on patients and administering what care you can, you're acutely aware of the enormity of the task at hand. There's no room for complacency, no time to rest on laurels that haven't yet been earned. Every day is a battle against the forces of ignorance and inertia, and while victory is far from assured, the fight is worth every ounce of effort. In the grand tapestry of history, the Victorian era is a pivotal chapter, one where the seeds of modern healthcare are sown amidst the chaos of a rapidly changing world. It's a time of contradictions, where the promise of progress sits uneasily alongside the harsh realities of a society struggling to adapt to the new. And you, dear nurse, are right at the heart of it all, navigating this complex landscape with determination and a touch of gallows humor. So, as the afternoon rounds draw to a close and the shadows lengthen across the ward, you take a moment to reflect on the day's events. There's still work to be done, progress to be made, and lives to be saved. But for now, you allow yourself a brief pause, a chance to catch your breath before diving back into the fray. After all, this is Victorian London, where the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only way forward is through. As the evening shadows stretch across the hospital floor, you find yourself in the final stretch of a day that feels like it's lasted a Victorian lifetime. The clang of a bell signals the end of visiting hours, and you watch as weary family members shuffle out, leaving behind their loved ones in your capable hands. It's a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to catch your breath amidst the chaos. But let's not kid ourselves. This isn't a peaceful interlude. It's the calm before the storm of night shift. The personal toll of your profession is as visible as those damp, grimy sheets you've been changing all day. Your feet ache from hours spent on the unforgiving cold tiles, and your back protests each time you bend to help a patient. It's a physical reminder that nursing in Victorian London is no mere job. It's a marathon of endurance. The emotional strain is its own beast. You've witnessed suffering and death, joy and recovery, all crammed into one long, exhausting day. It's enough to make you question your choices, except for that small, persistent flame of purpose that keeps you going. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and consider the broader canvas of your life's work. The Victorian era is a time of seismic shifts. The Industrial Revolution has turbocharged economies, but it's also left a trail of social upheaval in its wake. The nursing profession is caught in this whirlwind of change, evolving from a job that was once considered little more than domestic servitude into a respected occupation. Florence Nightingale has opened the door, but it's nurses like you who are kicking it wide open, demanding better working conditions and professional recognition. Your fight isn't just about personal betterment. It's a battle for the soul of the profession. The emergence of professional nursing schools, like Nightingale's own at St. Thomas's, is a game changer. By 1860, her school was training nurses who would go on to revolutionize hospital care across the globe. You're part of a vanguard pushing for standardized training, which is slowly but surely raising the bar for medical care. It's a vital step toward professional respect, but it's also a slog through a swamp of societal resistance and institutional inertia. Speaking of resistance, let's talk money. Your annual salary of £10 to £20 is a pittance, barely enough to sustain you in a city where the cost of living is climbing faster than a hot air balloon. Rent, food, and even the occasional indulgence like a theater ticket are constant reminders of your financial tightrope walk. Yet, the push for fair wages is gaining traction. The establishment of nursing organizations is laying the groundwork for collective bargaining, a radical notion in a world where women are expected to be seen, not heard. As the evening wears on, you can't help but ponder the romanticized image of the Victorian nurse, that angelic figure casting a halo in the dim light of a ward. It's a powerful narrative, one that's been etched into the public consciousness by art and literature. But the reality, it's a lot less angelic and far more gritty. You're not just the lady with the lamp. You're the one with calloused hands, a sore back, and a mind as sharp as a scalpel. The legend paints you as a saint. The truth is you're a soldier in a relentless battle against ignorance and disease. Yet the appeal of the myth is undeniable. There's something comforting in the idea of the selfless caregiver, sacrificing everything for the good of others. It's a narrative that resonates with a society grappling with rapid change, offering a semblance of stability amidst the storm. But for you, the real story is in the sweat and tears, the moments of triumph and despair that define each day. It's a messy, complicated truth, but it's yours, and you wouldn't trade it for the world. In this age of transition, you're part of a larger narrative, a social and political shift that will ripple through history. The fight for improved working conditions and professional recognition is a microcosm of the broader struggle for equality and justice. It's a reminder that progress is never easy. It's a path paved with perseverance and the refusal to accept the status quo. As your shift finally draws to a close, you take a moment to reflect on the day's events. Sure, the romance of the Victorian nurse is a captivating tale, but the reality is far more compelling. It's a story of resilience, determination, and the unyielding spirit of those who dare to challenge the way things are. You're not just a part of history, you're shaping it, one patient at a time. So there you stand, on the cusp of a new dawn, with the knowledge that your work is far from over. The legacy of the Victorian nurse is not just a chapter in a history book. It's a living testament to the power of human resolve. And as you step out into the cool night air, the city of London sprawling before you, you know that whatever tomorrow brings, you'll be ready to face it head-on. Because in this world of grit and grime, you're not just surviving, you're blazing a trail for those who will follow. And that, dear friend, is a legacy worth every ounce of effort. The first light of dawn sneaks through the narrow window of your stone cell, nudging you awake in that 12th century monastery in England. No soft alarm tones here, just the relentless discipline of the rule of St. Benedict. With a groggy sigh, you rise, stretching your back after a night on a straw mattress that could double as a medieval torture device. The air is crisp, hinting at the chill that never quite leaves these stone walls. Welcome to your early morning routine, where luxury means a roof over your head and the promise of a meal that won't poison you. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The day is young, and you've got matins to attend, the first of 8 daily prayer services that structure your life like clockwork in an era when clocks are still a twinkle in a craftsman's eye. Now, you might expect the life of a monk to be a leisurely affair, all contemplation and leisurely strolls through the cloisters. Spoiler alert, it's not. The Rule of St. Benedict is as much a time management manifesto as it is a spiritual guide. It's all about ora et labora, prayer and work, balanced with the precision of a Swiss watch. Well, if Swiss watches had been invented yet. The bell tolls, echoing through the corridors, and you're off to the chapel for matins. Skipping isn't an option unless you're keen on a penance that makes your current sleep deprivation seem like a vacation. Matins is the longest prayer service of the day, sometimes lasting 2 hours. That's 2 full hours before most folks have even considered leaving bed. The ritual is a blend of psalms, hymns, and readings, all in Latin, a language you know just well enough to not mess up the chants and earn a stern look from Brother Prior. As you chant, it's worth noting that this strict schedule isn't just about spiritual discipline. It's a finely tuned system that keeps the monastery, and by extension, the medieval economy, ticking. Monasteries aren't just centers of prayer, they're economic powerhouses. By the 12th century, these ecclesiastical institutions own a staggering 1/3 of the land in England. That's right, monks are medieval moguls, managing vast swaths of farmland and engaging in trade that rivals some of the era's wealthiest nobles. But let's not romanticize it too much. This isn't some entrepreneurial utopia. The land was often acquired through less than holy means, like the generous donations of dying nobles seeking a fast pass to heaven. And while the monks might be rolling in land, they're not exactly rolling in luxury. The monastic vow of poverty means you're not seeing any of that wealth in your cell, unless you count the occasional upgrade from straw to hay in your bedding. Back in the chapel, as the final psalm of matins echoes into silence, you feel a moment of introspective peace, a fleeting break before the day ramps up with its relentless rhythm of prayer, work, and study. And let's not forget meals, where the main ingredients are humility and whatever grains are in season. Spoiler, it's mostly porridge. But before breakfast, there's still Lord's, the next service in line, because who needs breakfast before the second round of prayers? As you shuffle out of the chapel, you can't help but marvel at the efficiency of monastic life. It's like the original productivity hack, centuries before anyone could tweet about it. This isn't just about saving souls. It's about building a legacy that, ironically, will outlast many a medieval kingdom. The monk's daily grind keeps the monastery thriving, preserving knowledge, and managing resources with a dedication that would make a modern-day CEO sweat. So, as you head toward the refectory for a quick bite before Lord's, take a moment to appreciate the peculiar genius of monastic time management. It's a world where enlightenment comes not only from prayer, but from the precision of a life ruled by the bell. And as you dip your spoon into the morning's grainy sustenance, remember, coffee is still a few centuries away, so let that thought wake you up. As the day unfolds, you'll see just how integral these monasteries are to the medieval landscape, both spiritually and economically. They're the Google of their time, collecting knowledge, cultivating land, and wielding influence with a quiet power that shapes the world beyond their cloistered walls. And while the life of a monk might seem austere, it's anything but insignificant. So, take a deep breath. This day in the life of a 12th century monk has only just begun, and there's plenty more history to unfold before the sun sets. As the first rays of daylight stretch across the monastery's stone corridors, you're gearing up for the next chapter of this monastic adventure. No rest for the dedicated, because it's time to head to the scriptorium, the sacred space where monks become the medieval version of data processors. That's right, you're about to become a human Xerox machine, tasked with preserving the wisdom of the ages one ink stroke at a time. Now, let's talk shop. The scriptorium is a hive of activity, even if the buzz is more about the scratching of quills than the hum of conversation. Silence is golden here, and not just because it keeps the focus sharp. It's a reflection of the monastic commitment to contemplation, though sometimes it feels more like a vow of enforced quietude. And while the romantic image of monks quietly toiling away in serene silence might make for a picturesque scene, the reality is a bit grittier. Imagine spending hours hunched over a desk, your fingers stained with ink, your eyes straining in the dim light. Forget ergonomic chairs. You're lucky if your stool doesn't wobble like a medieval seesaw. The materials you're working with are as fascinating as they are fragile. Let's start with vellum, the Rolls-Royce of medieval riding surfaces. Made from calfskin, vellum is a luxury item with a price tag that could rival a small herd of sheep. In today's terms, think about $50 per sheet, depending on quality and availability. Talk about a costly canvas. And then there's the ink, a concoction of soot, water, and gum arabic. Simple yet effective. It's black gold, at least in the world of scribes. The cost of ink doesn't hit the same luxury levels as vellum, but it's still a precious commodity, especially when you consider the labor involved in its production. And let's not ignore the quill, the scribe's trusty tool. Each one has to be carefully crafted from goose feathers, with the nib cut to perfection. It's the medieval equivalent of customizing your own Mont Blanc pen, except instead of a sleek black finish, you're dealing with feathers and a knife. The catch: one slip and you've got ink blots all over your carefully penned page, a mistake that screams rookie in any century. As you labor over the manuscript, it's crucial to remember that this isn't just a job, it's a mission. You're safeguarding the knowledge of antiquity, preserving texts that range from religious tomes to classical works. Monasteries are the intellectual powerhouses of the medieval world. Think of them as the original cloud storage, albeit with a slightly higher risk of fire damage. But the work isn't just physically taxing, it's mentally exhausting too. The rule of St. Benedict, which governs every aspect of monastic life, applies here just as rigorously. Your work must be precise, your focus unbroken. This isn't some leisurely hobby, it's a full-on grind that demands both skill and patience. Mistakes aren't just frowned upon, they're practically sacrilegious. There's a reason these manuscripts are so valued, and it's not just the cost of materials. It's the sheer human effort involved in creating them, making each one a testament to the endurance and dedication of the scribes. Now, let's bust a myth or two. While it's tempting to view the scriptorium as a peaceful haven of intellectual pursuit, the conditions are anything but idyllic. The room can be cold, the light dim, the hours long. Monks might be revered for their scholarly contributions, but they're not immune to the physical hardships of medieval life. Backaches, eye strain, and ink-stained fingers are part of the package. It's a tough gig, and the romanticized image of the scholarly monk needs a reality check. This isn't some leisurely stroll through the annals of history. It's a relentless march, sometimes more grueling than glorious. Yet despite the hardships, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that your work has the potential to outlast you by centuries. It's a legacy-building exercise, a contribution to a world that values knowledge as much as it does prayer. In the grand scheme of things, you're part of a tradition that plays a pivotal role in shaping the intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages. And while you might not see the fruits of your labor in your lifetime, the manuscripts you produce will become the foundation for future scholarship, the building blocks of an intellectual renaissance. As you finally set your quill down and stretch your aching fingers, it's time to take a moment and appreciate the quiet triumph of the scriptorium. Here, amidst the silence and the shadows, you're crafting more than just manuscripts. You're weaving the very fabric of history, one painstaking page at a time. So, take a deep breath, because this day is far from over. There's still plenty more to explore in the life of a medieval monk, each moment a testament to the grit and grace that define this remarkable chapter of history. As you finally set your quill down and stretch your aching fingers, it's time to shift gears. The relentless march of the monastic schedule pauses, albeit briefly, for the daily ritual of the main meal. And let me tell you, the culinary scene in a 12th century monastery is more than just gruel and gloom. Despite the austere reputation of monastic life, the monk's diet isn't the medieval version of a juice cleanse. In fact, it's a surprisingly varied affair, offering more than mere survival rations. Let's start with the basics: fish, grains, and legumes. Meat might be off the menu for most monks, a nod to the vow of abstinence. But don't let that fool you into thinking they're subsisting on scraps. Fish is a staple, and not just any fish. Think eel, pike, and even salmon when the budget allows. These aren't your everyday catches. They're the medieval equivalent of a 5-star seafood platter. And if you're wondering how these fishy delights made their way to the table, remember that monasteries often owned prime fishing rights, ensuring a steady supply of aquatic protein. Then there's the bread, the cornerstone of the monastic diet. We're talking hearty loaves, baked from a variety of grains. Wheat, rye, and barley all have their place in the monastic pantry, providing sustenance that sticks to your ribs and keeps you going from prayer to prayer. And let's not forget the vegetables. Cabbage, peas, and beans round out the meal, adding a splash of color to the otherwise beige palette. It's like a medieval Whole Foods, minus the sky-high prices. Now, let's talk dairy. Cheese and butter are regulars at the monastic table, offering a rich, creamy counterpoint to the otherwise sturdy fare. Cheese, in particular, is a point of pride, with some monasteries developing their own unique varieties. Think of it as a precursor to today's artisanal cheese movement, with monks perfecting recipes that would make any modern cheesemonger jealous. But enough about the food itself. Let's dig into the economic and political clout that makes this spread possible. Monasteries weren't just spiritual havens. They were agricultural juggernauts, wielding influence that extended far beyond their cloistered walls. By the 12th century, these ecclesiastical institutions controlled vast swaths of land, transforming them into highly productive agricultural enterprises. They cultivated crops, raised livestock, and managed woodlands with an efficiency that would rival any contemporary agribusiness. And here's where it gets interesting: the myth of monastic self-sufficiency. While it's tempting to imagine monks as isolated hermits, living off the fruits of their own labor, the reality is far more complex. Monasteries relied heavily on external labor and resources. Sure, the monks played a role in the fields, but they also employed lay brothers and hired workers to do the heavy lifting. It's a bit like running a startup. You're the visionary, but you've got a team doing the day-to-day grind. This reliance on external resources extended to trade as well. Monasteries were hubs of commerce, engaging in a bustling trade network that spanned the continent. They dealt in everything from wool to wine, leveraging their economic power to shape regional markets. And remember those fish we talked about earlier? Many of them arrived via trade routes, a testament to the monasteries' far-reaching connections. Politically, monasteries were no slouches either. Their economic might translate it into significant influence, often rivaling that of secular lords. They held sway over local politics, mediated disputes, and even played a role in shaping regional laws. It's a reminder that in medieval society, spiritual authority and temporal power were often two sides of the same coin. And yet, despite their wealth and influence, monasteries were bound by the rule of St. Benedict, which mandated a life of poverty and humility. It's a fascinating contradiction. Institutions dripping with resources, yet inhabited by individuals committed to a life devoid of personal wealth. This tension between spiritual ideals and economic realities is a hallmark of monastic life, a balancing act that defined the medieval church. As you sit down to the midday meal, surrounded by your fellow monks in the refectory, it's hard not to marvel at the intricate web of influence that sustains this simple repast. From the fields to the fish ponds, from the trade routes to the political alliances, every bite is a testament to the complex machinery of monastic life. And while the meal itself might be humble, the story behind it is anything but. So, as you break bread and partake in this daily communion, remember that each mouthful is a taste of history, a reminder of the power and paradox of the medieval monastery. It's a world where the sacred and the secular intertwine, creating a legacy that resonates far beyond the cloistered walls. And while the life of a monk might seem removed from the world, it's anything but isolated. These are the movers and shakers of the medieval economy, shaping the landscape in ways that would leave even the most hardened CEO in awe. As you rise from the table, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the refectory windows, it's time to head back to the grind. There's still work to be done, prayers to be sung, and pages to be penned. The day is far from over, and the monastic rhythm continues its relentless beat. But for now, take a moment to savor the intricate dance of history and humanity that unfolds with each passing hour. It's a world of contrasts and contradictions, where the past and present collide in a symphony of devotion and duty. As the refectory empties and you shuffle back into the stone corridors of monastic life, it's time to roll up those robe sleeves and dive back into the afternoon's grind. But don't think for a moment that you're merely returning to religious rituals or scribble duties. Nope, these monks are multitasking marvels, straddling the line between spirituality and science, prayer and practical application. It's ora et labora with a twist, some serious medieval innovation. Let's clear up a misconception right off the bat. Monks weren't just cloistered away, chanting psalms and copying texts like some medieval photocopiers. They were the unsung heroes of scientific progress. Think of them as the Bill Gateses and Steve Jobses of the Middle Ages, minus the turtlenecks and tech gadgets. These guys were laying the groundwork for everything from modern medicine to agricultural techniques, and they were doing it all with a quill in one hand and a prayer book in the other. Take a moment to imagine the scriptorium not just as a place of literary preservation, but as a hotbed of scientific thought. The manuscripts you're so diligently copying, they're not just dusty old tomes. They're the cutting-edge textbooks of the time, filled with the knowledge of Aristotle, Galen, and other ancient thinkers. And believe it or not, you might even be adding a few footnotes of your own. Monasteries were the intellectual powerhouses where monks translated, annotated, and debated these works, gradually building on the wisdom of the ancients. You can thank the monastic libraries, bulging with scrolls and codices, for that. These were the Google Drives of the medieval world, storing everything from medicinal recipes to treatises on the natural world. This was a time when the average Joe couldn't just pop down to the local library or, heaven forbid, Google how to cure the plague. Monasteries were the centers of learning, where knowledge was guarded and disseminated with a dedication that was almost holy. Now, let's talk medicine. Forget the image of monks as mere spiritual healers. They were the original healthcare providers, centuries before the NHS was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. Medieval medicine might seem positively barbaric by today's standards, leeches, anyone. But it was the best game in town. Monks were the ones who kept this knowledge alive, scribbling down herbal remedies and anatomical observations. They were the pharmacists, doctors, and nurses of their day, and their herbal gardens were the original pharmacies. But don't romanticize it too much. This wasn't all about spiritual healing and gentle bedside manners. Monastic medicine was a hard-nosed, practical enterprise. Those herb gardens, they were meticulously organized, each plant catalogued for its medicinal properties. And let's not forget the economics of it all. These remedies didn't just help the sick, they were also a source of revenue. Cures were traded like medieval Bitcoin, with monasteries at the center of the market. And talk about contributions to agriculture. Monks were pioneering crop rotation techniques, figuring out how to get the most out of their fields without depleting the soil. They were the original environmentalists, though probably not out of any particular love for Mother Nature, but more because starving is a pretty powerful motivator. Their innovations in farming were no small potatoes. They were developing methods that would sustain communities and keep the monastic coffers full, all while ensuring there was enough grain for the daily bread and ale. But don't mistake these centers of innovation for serene utopias. The monasteries were also hotbeds of internal politics and drama that could rival any soap opera. You see, behind those cloistered walls, not everyone was singing from the same hymn sheet. There were power struggles, factions, and rivalries, enough to make any Game of Thrones fan feel right at home. The rule of St. Benedict might have called for humility and obedience, but monks were human, and where there's humanity, there's conflict. Picture this. You're in a chapter meeting. The abbot's trying to keep order, but Brother Stephen and Brother Bernard are at it again, bickering over who gets to oversee the new vineyard. This isn't just a squabble over grapes. It's about prestige, influence, and who gets to call the shots. In a world where the abbot's word is supposed to be law, internal politics could get as tangled as a medieval tapestry. The stakes were high because controlling resources meant controlling power. And let's not forget about the larger political landscape. Monasteries weren't just spiritual centers. They were influential players in the feudal system. They hobnobbed with kings and dukes, sometimes mediating disputes or providing counsel. But this wasn't purely altruistic. Every alliance, every political move was carefully calculated to protect the monastery's interests and maintain its standing. Monks might have taken a vow of poverty, but they were shrewd operators in the game of medieval politics. So, as you dive back into your afternoon tasks, whether it's tending the herb garden, copying a manuscript, or perhaps even brewing up a medicinal concoction, Remember that you're part of something far bigger than yourself. You're contributing to a legacy of innovation and influence that will ripple through history long after your time is done. The life of a monk is a tapestry of devotion, duty, and discovery, woven together with threads of intellect and ambition. And as you reflect on your place in this intricate web, take a moment to appreciate the paradoxes and complexities of monastic life. These weren't just men of the cloth. They were men of the world, navigating the turbulent waters of power, knowledge, and faith. It's a world where the sacred and the secular collide, where the quest for enlightenment is as much about earthly wisdom as it is about spiritual salvation. And as the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the cloister, you're reminded that this day in the life of a 12th century monk is far from over. There's still much to learn, much to ponder, and much to contribute to the unfolding story of history. As the afternoon shadows begin to stretch like lazy cats across the cloister, you've got one eye on the horizon. Vespers and Compline are just around the corner. But before you get too lost in the liturgical rhythm, let's widen the lens and take a look at the broader impact of monastic life on medieval society. After all, these monasteries weren't just spiritual retreats. They were the beating heart of medieval England, pulsing with influence and importance. Let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant in the cloister. It's easy to romanticize the monastery as a serene sanctuary of learning and prayer, but the truth is they were more like medieval conglomerates. Picture a network of abbeys and priories sprawling across the landscape like a medieval Starbucks, each one a hub of economic and cultural activity. By the 12th century, monasteries owned a jaw-dropping one-third of England's land. It's not just a spiritual footprint. That's a footprint the size of Godzilla's. These monastic powerhouses weren't just hoarding land for the fun of it. They were agricultural dynamos, pushing the limits of medieval farming and ensuring the surrounding communities were well fed. They cultivated fields, raised livestock, and even dabbled in vineyards. Yes, monks were the original hipster winemakers, producing vino long before it was cool. And let's not forget the wool trade. English monasteries had a wool production operation that would make even the most seasoned shepherd do a double take. Wool was the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley tech stocks, booming, essential, and a little bit fleece-why. But here's the twist. Despite all this wealth and power, the life of a monk remained rooted in poverty and humility, at least in theory. The rule of St. Benedict was clear on that point. Even if human nature had other ideas, monasteries might have been rolling in riches, but the monks themselves kept that vow of poverty alive, living life, with a distinct absence of bling. You might be presiding over acres of fertile land, but your personal corner of the monastery wouldn't see much more than a straw mattress and a wooden stool. Now, let's talk decline. Fast forward a few centuries to the reign of Henry Roman VIII, and this monastic prosperity begins to unravel like a poorly knit sweater. The famous dissolution of the monasteries was less about spiritual reform and more about cold, hard cash. Henry needed funds to fill his coffers, and monasteries, with their land and wealth, were ripe for the picking. In a move that was as much about politics as it was about religion, Henry systematically dismantled over 800 monastic houses between 1536 and 1541. Just like that, centuries of monastic influence vanished almost overnight, like a medieval magic trick. But why did this happen? Well, the monasteries had become victims of their own success. Their wealth made them targets, and their power was seen as a threat to the crown. It didn't help that public perception had shifted. Monasteries were increasingly viewed as corrupt and decadent, a far cry from the austere spiritual havens they were supposed to be. Stories of monks living it up on the church's dime didn't exactly help their reputation. In the end, the dissolution was a masterclass in realpolitik, with Henry playing the role of chess master, sacrificing bishops to gain a strategic edge. What's left of the monastic legacy then? Well, quite a lot, actually. While the physical structures of many monasteries crumbled, their cultural and intellectual imprints are indelible. Monasteries were the crucibles of learning, preserving ancient texts and knowledge through the Dark Ages. Their contributions to agriculture, education, and medicine laid the foundations for future advancements. They were the original think tanks, the medieval MITs, where scholars debated ideas that would shape the world long after the abbey roofs caved in. And on a more tangible level, many of the ruins still stand today, hauntingly beautiful reminders of a bygone era. They whisper stories of devotion and discipline to anyone who cares to listen. They tell tales of monks who, despite their flaws, managed to sustain a world teetering on the edge of chaos. They remind us that even in their decline, monasteries left a legacy that transcends the physical. It's a bit like an ancient Snapchat filter over the English countryside, a ghostly overlay of the past on the present. So as you head into Vespers, with the evening light filtering through the stained glass like a divine kaleidoscope, take a moment to reflect on the paradox of monastic life. It was a world of contradictions, where the sacred met the secular in a dance as old as time. Monks were visionaries and pragmatists, spiritual guides and economic power players. They navigated a complex world with a foot in both the heavens and the earth, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as the stone walls they once called home. As the final notes of Compline echo in the chapel, signaling the end of the day, consider the lessons these medieval monks offer. In a world of uncertainty and change, they remind us of the power of dedication, the importance of community, and the potential for resilience in the face of adversity. Their story is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit and the enduring quest for meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it. And with that, the day in the life of a 12th century monk comes to a close. As you retreat to your cell, ready for another night on that less than comfy straw mattress, remember that you're not just resting your head on history, you're part of it. So sleep well, for tomorrow brings another chapter in the ever-unfolding saga of human endeavor. Who knows? Maybe you'll dream of vellum and quills, of fields and prayer, and wake up with a newfound appreciation for the monks who walked before you. The Persian Empire's story kicks off with a bang, or maybe more of a well-timed strategic whisper, thanks to Cyrus the Great, whose exploits make Game of Thrones look like a friendly game of checkers. Born around 600 BC, Cyrus was the kind of guy who didn't just think outside the box. He crushed the box, turned it into a chariot, and rolled over the known world with it. His empire-building resume is nothing short of epic, encompassing a realm that sprawled over 2 million square miles, from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. Now, when you hear great, you might picture a benevolent ruler, the sort who pats orphans on the head and feeds the hungry. And sure, Cyrus has that reputation, but let's put on the skeptical glasses for a sec. Was he really the Mother Teresa of conquerors, or did he just have the best PR team in ancient history? The truth, as usual, is a little more nuanced and a lot more interesting. First up, let's talk about his conquests. Cyrus wasn't just randomly picking places off a map like a crazed travel blogger. His campaigns were deliberate, strategic, and eerily efficient. In 550 BC, he took on the Medes. Remember them. They were the big kids on the block before the Persians came along. The actual conquest was less of a bloody showdown and more of a sophisticated chess game where Cyrus used alliances and deflections to get what he wanted. It's said that he even managed to flip the Medes' army to his side, like convincing the opposing team to score for you in the middle of the World Cup. But Cyrus's greatest heist was probably the capture of Babylon in 539 BC. This wasn't just a military conquest, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Babylon was a city known for its massive walls, not exactly the kind of place you waltz into. Instead of a head-on attack, Cyrus diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water level to march his troops right through the riverbed under Babylon's walls. Talk about thinking outside the moat. Now, what about these economic and social structures that propped up such a vast empire? Running a kingdom that makes today's largest corporations look like mom-and-pop shops wasn't just about swords and shields. Cyrus was a logistical genius. He implemented a system of satrapies. Think of them as ancient provinces, each with its own governor or satrap. These guys were the middle managers of the empire, tasked with maintaining order, collecting taxes, and sending a steady stream of cash and resources to the imperial center. This decentralized approach worked wonders. It allowed local customs to flourish under Persian rule, which kept the populace happy-ish, or at least not in open revolt, which is about as happy as you could hope for in ancient times. It also meant that the empire could react quickly to crises, with local satraps handling issues without waiting for a directive from the big guy in charge. It was like franchise management, but with more swords and fewer hamburgers. Now, let's touch on Cyrus's image as a benevolent conqueror. His reputation wasn't entirely undeserved. The Cyrus cylinder, often hailed as the first declaration of human rights, paints him as a liberator who respected local traditions and religions. When he entered Babylon, he supposedly freed the enslaved populations, including the Jews, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. It was an act that earned him a shout-out in the Bible, no less. But let's not get swept away by the fan mail. While Cyrus's policies were progressive for the time, they also served a strategic purpose. By presenting himself as a liberator rather than an oppressor, he secured loyalty and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. In other words, kindness was a tool of governance as much as it was a virtue. Cyrus's approach to leadership was as much about image as it was about administration. He was a master of optics, ensuring that his conquests were seen as liberations and that his rule was portrayed as just and fair. There's a reason why, over 500 years later, we're still talking about him, not just as a conqueror, but as a statesman, a reformer, and a mythmaker. His legacy is one of those rare cases where the reality might just live up to the legend, provided you squint a bit and overlook the usual ancient world shenanigans involving a fair amount of bloodshed. So, as we wrap up this leg of the Persian Empire's journey, keep in mind that Cyrus's story is as much about perception as it is about reality. Whether he was a benevolent ruler or a savvy politician who knew how to spin a good yarn, his impact is undeniable. His empire laid the groundwork for what would become one of history's greatest civilizations, setting the stage for successors who would continue to build on his vision, each with their own mix of brilliance and brutality. Stay tuned, because the story of the Persian Empire is just getting started, and trust me, the plot twists would make even the most seasoned screenwriter blush. Now, while Cyrus was busy rewriting the playbook on empire building, his son Cambyses Roman II was waiting in the wings with a script that was, let's say, a little less polished. If Cyrus was the empire's charismatic frontman, Cambyses was more like the drummer who got a little too enthusiastic and accidentally punted his kit off the stage. But don't let the clumsy metaphor fool you. Cambyses had ambition and a particular fixation on adding Egypt to the family's imperial collection. Cambyses Roman II kicked off his solo career around 530 BC, and right off the bat, he set his sights on Egypt. Why Egypt, you ask? Well, besides the allure of pyramids and an economy that floated on the Nile like a well-oiled barge, Egypt was the regional power that had managed to resist Cyrus's overtures. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the crown jewel of the ancient world, and Cambyses was determined to make it his own. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched his campaign to conquer Egypt, a logistical nightmare that makes modern military operations look like a game of Risk. The Persian army had to cross the Sinai Desert, a barren expanse that was less sandy beaches and more desolate wasteland. It wasn't just a matter of getting from point A to point B. It was about keeping tens of thousands of troops fed, watered, and ready to fight after trekking through one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Enter the logistics. The Persians weren't just hauling soldiers. They were moving an entire mobile city. This expedition required a monumental amount of supplies, food, water, weapons, and even the occasional luxury to keep morale from plummeting like a rock. Cambyses had to coordinate with the local Arab tribes to secure water supplies across the desert, essentially creating ancient rest stops along the way. It was a supply chain that would make Amazon blush. Once they finally arrived in Egypt, the real fun began. The Egyptians, led by Pharaoh Psamtik Roman III, were no pushovers. They had a formidable military and were well prepared for a fight. The Battle of Pelusium, an epic clash near the Nile Delta, was where Cambyses showed a bit of that Persian cunning. According to Herodotus, Cambyses used cats as part of his psychological warfare. Yes, cats. Egyptians revered cats, so Cambyses ordered his men to paint cats on their shields, and supposedly he even released a bunch of them onto the battlefield. Let's not get too carried away with the feline fantasy, though. While it makes for a great story, it's more likely that Cambyses just outmaneuvered and outnumbered the Egyptians, ultimately capturing Memphis and claiming Egypt as his own. With Egypt under Persian control, Cambyses seemed to be sitting pretty. But here's where the story gets a bit wobbly. There's a narrative that paints Cambyses as a tyrant who went off the rails, indulging in acts of madness and cruelty. Herodotus, that ancient gossip columnist, reported that Cambyses killed the Apis bull, a sacred Egyptian symbol, and went on a spree of sacrilegious destruction. But let's pause for a moment and consider the source. Herodotus wasn't exactly a neutral observer. He was writing from a perspective steeped in Greek bias against the Persians. It's entirely possible that Cambyses wasn't as deranged as the stories suggest. Killing the Apis bull might have been a political move to suppress Egyptian resistance, a calculated act of dominance. The tales of his madness could have been propaganda, spun by those with a vested interest in discrediting him. After all, history is written by the victors, and Cambyses had plenty of enemies eager to see his reputation tarnished. This brings us to the economic implications of Cambyses's campaign. Egypt was a rich addition to the Persian Empire, boasting fertile lands and a robust economy. By controlling the Nile, Cambyses secured a vital artery for trade and resources, enhancing the empire's wealth and strategic reach. Yet, maintaining control over this new territory was no small feat. It required a delicate balance of force and diplomacy, a juggling act that Cambyses managed with varying degrees of success. As Cambyses continued his rule, he set his sights on further expansions, including campaigns into Nubia and Libya. These weren't exactly the triumphs he'd hoped for. The Nubian expedition, in particular, was a logistical disaster, with supply lines stretched too thin and the harsh environment taking its toll. It was like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of bricks, and the Persians returned empty-handed, their ambitions thwarted by Mother Nature herself. Despite these setbacks, Cambyses's reign was not without accomplishments. He managed to keep the vast Persian Empire together, no small achievement given its size and diversity. However, the tales of his supposed insanity continued to haunt him, overshadowing his successes. Whether Cambyses was truly mad or merely the victim of historical character assassination, his story serves as a reminder of how fragile legacies can be. So, as we leave Cambyses to his complicated legacy, remember that the truth is often more nuanced than the myths suggest. His reign, marked by both conquest and controversy, set the stage for the next chapter in the Persian saga. The empire was on the cusp of even greater challenges and changes, with new leaders waiting to make their mark. Stay tuned as the tale of the Persian Empire unfolds, with twists and turns that would keep even the most seasoned historian on the edge of their seat. As Cambyses's tumultuous tale fades into the annals of history, enter Darius the Great, the kind of ruler who looks at a chaotic chessboard and decides it's time to introduce a whole new game. Coming into power in 522 BC, his rise wasn't exactly smooth sailing, more like a series of rapids in a rickety canoe. This was a time when the Persian Empire, vast as it was, felt like a castle built on sand, shaking with every breeze of rebellion. Darius had his work cut out for him, and boy, did he deliver. Let's set the scene. Darius wasn't born with a crown on his head. He was a relative outsider, a member of the royal court, but not direct lineage material. His path to power was more coup d'etat than coronation. When Cambyses died under mysterious circumstances, cue the ancient conspiracy theories, Darius seized the moment, allegedly slaying an impostor king named Gormara who had claimed the throne. This tale of intrigue and assassination reads like a script for a political thriller. But hey, in ancient Persia, the line between history and myth was thinner than a pharaoh's linen. Once he secured the throne, Darius faced the monumental task of holding this sprawling empire together. Picture this, a patchwork of cultures and territories stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, each with its own customs, languages, and occasional penchant for rebellion. Darius realized that ruling through brute force was like trying to herd cats with a rolled-up newspaper. It just wasn't going to cut it. Instead, he turned to the power of bureaucracy, that unglamorous but essential tool of governance. Darius was the Michelangelo of administration, sculpting an empire out of chaos with the chisel of organization. He divided the empire into 20 satrapies, a little like splitting a massive pizza into slices for easier handling. Each satrapy had a governor, or satrap, responsible for keeping the peace and collecting taxes, while also answering directly to Darius. This wasn't just micromanagement hell. It was a way to keep the empire's pulse in check ensuring that each region felt just enough autonomy to prevent mutinous thoughts. And let's not forget the big money move. Darius reformed the empire's economic system with the introduction of a standardized currency, the daric, named modestly after himself. Before this, barter was the name of the game, with traders swapping everything from gold to goats. But the daric was more than just shiny metal. It was a unifying force, a symbol of the empire's strength and cohesion. This coinage system streamlined trade across thousands of miles, making it easier to collect taxes and pay soldiers, because nothing says loyalty like a well-paid army. Speaking of long distances, how do you manage an empire that makes the United Nations look like a neighborhood watch group? Enter the Royal Road, a marvel of engineering and logistics that spanned over 500 miles from Sardis to Susa. This wasn't just a dirt track for caravans and camels. It was the ancient FedEx Express, enabling efficient communication and troop movement across the empire. Messengers could cover the entire distance in about a week, a rate that would make even the Pony Express blush. This road was the empire's nervous system, ensuring that Darius could keep a finger on the pulse of his far-flung dominion. Yet, for all his administrative genius, Darius faced his fair share of challenges. Revolts were as common as dust storms in the desert, with regions like Babylon and Egypt not exactly thrilled about Persian oversight. Darius had to quash these uprisings with a blend of military might and strategic clemency, often opting to incorporate local customs and leaders into the imperial fold rather than impose foreign rule. It was governance by inclusion, a strategy that might sound progressive even today. Now, let's talk legitimacy. Darius wasn't just about flexing his administrative muscles. He was keen on showcasing his divine right to rule. He commissioned inscriptions, like the famous Behistun inscription, a monumental billboard of sorts, carved high on a cliff in present-day Iran. This inscription was no casual graffiti. At 100 feet tall, it detailed Darius's lineage and victories, asserting his divine mandate from Ahura Mazda, the chief god of Zoroastrianism. It's like the ancient equivalent of a social media profile, only carved in stone and visible for miles. But Darius didn't just rely on divine claims to bolster his authority. He understood the power of optics and propaganda. His empire was a tapestry of cultures, and he wove it with care, respecting local customs and religions as long as they didn't threaten his rule. He was a master of optics, blending diplomacy with the occasional necessary force to keep the empire's engine running smoothly. Despite these achievements, ruling such a vast empire was akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Each success seemed to invite new challenges. The Ionian Revolt in 499 BC, sparked by Greek city-states under Persian control, was a stark reminder that not everyone was content with Persian oversight. Darius's response was both swift and severe, but the revolt set the stage for the legendary Greco-Persian Wars, a saga of clashing civilizations that would echo through history. As we leave Darius at the helm of his vast empire, remember that his legacy is not just one of conquest, but of careful stewardship and innovation. His reign was a testament to the power of organization and vision, a reminder that sometimes the pen, or in this case the quill, is mightier than the sword. The story of the Persian Empire under Darius is far from over, with new chapters of conflict and triumph waiting to unfold. Stay tuned, because the tale of this ancient superpower is about to take some dramatic turns in the hands of its future rulers. While Darius was busy juggling the empire like an ancient Cirque du Soleil performer, the Greeks were cooking up their own brand of drama. Enter the stage. The Greco-Persian Wars, the ancient world's equivalent of a blockbuster movie series, complete with epic battles, larger-than-life characters, and an enduring legacy that still sparkles in history books today. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of spears and sandals, let's set the scene. By the late 6th century BC, the Persian Empire, under Darius's meticulous reign, had stretched its fingers into the Ionian city-states of Asia Minor. These were Greek territories, but they were also under Persian control, a situation that didn't sit well with the Greeks, who weren't exactly fans of Persian governance. Cue the Ionian Revolt in 499 BC, where the Greeks, like rebellious teenagers, decided they'd had enough of their Persian overlords and kicked off a rebellion. This was a classic case of poking the bear, with the bear being Darius and his formidable empire. Now, let's talk strategy. The Ionian revolt was more than just a local scuffle. It was a spark that lit a broader conflict. The Greeks, with their penchant for individualism and democracy, found themselves at philosophical odds with the autocratic and expansive Persian regime. It wasn't just about territory. It was about two worlds colliding, each with its own ideology and way of life. The revolt, supported by Athens and Eretria, was a bold move, given that the Persian army was the ancient world's version of a well-oiled machine, boasting numbers and resources that could make any Greek hoplite break into a sweat. Despite this disadvantage, the Ionians were initially successful, capturing and torching Sardis, a key Persian city. But let's not get carried away with visions of Greek triumph. The revolt was eventually crushed by 493 BC, with Darius reasserting control and reminding everyone why he was the boss. The Greeks, however, had unwittingly set a much larger conflict into motion. Darius, understandably irritated by these Greek shenanigans, famously ordered a servant to remind him thrice daily, "Master, remember the Athenians. Talk about a grudge." So, with the Ionian revolt quashed, Darius turned his gaze westward, determined to teach the Greeks a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. This set the stage for the first Persian invasion of Greece in 490 BC. Now, keep in mind, this wasn't just about military might, it was a clash of cultures. The Greeks, especially the Athenians, saw themselves as defenders of freedom and democracy, a narrative that would become the stuff of legend. The Persians, on the other hand, were often painted as the barbarians at the gates, a portrayal that's about as nuanced as a sledgehammer. But let's pump the brakes on that myth, shall we? The term barbarian comes from the Greek word barbaros, which essentially meant someone who didn't speak Greek. It was less an insult and more a linguistic label, though it definitely carried some cultural snobbery. The Persians were far from the mindless hordes depicted in Greek storytelling. They were an advanced civilization, boasting sophisticated engineering, art, and governance. So, when we talk about the barbarian Persians, let's remember that the reality was a tapestry rich with complexity and innovation. Back to our story. Darius's first invasion culminated in the Battle of Marathon, a name now synonymous with endurance thanks to a certain Greek runner. The Persian forces, numbering around 25,000, landed at the plains of Marathon, facing off against a much smaller Athenian army of about 10,000 hoplites. The Athenians were led by the general Miltiades, who knew that he had to outsmart rather than outmuscle his foe. Here's where the Greeks pulled a rabbit out of their hoplite helmets. Miltiades devised a strategy that involved thinning the center of his line to strengthen the flanks. This allowed the Greeks to envelop the Persian forces, a tactic known as a double envelopment, which caught the Persians off guard. The result? A stunning Greek victory, with Persian casualties estimated at around 400 compared to just 192 Athenians. It was a David and Goliath moment, proving that cunning and courage could triumph over sheer numbers. But let's not get too swept away by the romanticism of Greek heroics. While the victory at Marathon was indeed remarkable, it was not the end of Persian ambitions. Darius was determined to return and make the Greeks pay, but fate had other plans. His death in 486 BC passed the torch of vengeance to his son, Xerxes, who would continue the saga with his own invasion. As we gear up for the next chapter involving Xerxes, let's pause to consider the ideological stakes of this conflict. The Greeks, with their city-states and democratic ideals, were fighting to preserve a way of life that valued individualism and civic duty. The Persians, on the other hand, were the architects of a vast empire that thrived on diversity and inclusion. As long as you paid your taxes and didn't stir up trouble, it was less about good versus evil and more about different visions for the world, a nuance often lost in the heroic narratives handed down through time. This clash of civilizations was a defining moment in history, setting the stage for future encounters and shaping the cultural and political landscape of the ancient world. As we move forward, remember that this was not just a series of battles, but a complex interplay of strategy, ideology, and ambition. The story of the Greco-Persian Wars is far from over, and the stakes are about to get even higher as Xerxes takes the helm. Stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken in ways that would make even a Greek dramatist proud. So, as the dust settled from the Battle of Marathon, the Greek city-states were busy celebrating their underdog victory with a side of hubris, while the Persians were licking their wounds and brewing a fresh batch of imperial ambition under the watchful eye of Xerxes' eye. Now, Xerxes wasn't just some petulant heir to Darius's throne. He was a man on a mission, carrying a grudge as heavy as a Persian war chariot, and with a flair for the dramatic that would make any modern-day action hero envious. Xerxes ascended to power in 486 BC, ready to avenge his father's thwarted plans, and more than a little peeved about the Greek audacity at Marathon. But before he could even think about setting sail for Greece, Xerxes had to put out several fires at home. Rebellions in Egypt and Babylon demanded attention first, because, let's face it, running a vast empire was a bit like playing whack-a-mole with insurrections. Once he hammered those down with a blend of military might and Persian pragmatism, think less peace talks and more strategic smackdowns, he could finally focus on the Greeks. By 480 BC, Xerxes launched what can only be described as the ancient equivalent of a military road trip from hell, complete with a royal entourage that put most modern production crews to shame. We're talking about an army possibly numbering 100, 000 to 150, 000, though Herodotus, in a fit of storyteller's flair, claimed a cool million. This amphibious and land-based invasion included a naval fleet of about 600 to 200 ships, depending on which ancient source you believe. These weren't just random figures. They were a testament to the logistical genius and sheer audacity of the Persian war machine. And then there was the engineering marvel, or folly, depending on your perspective, of the Hellespont Bridge. To get his army from Asia to Europe, Xerxes ordered the construction of a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont Strait, a span of over a mile of open water. It was a feat of engineering that involved lashing together hundreds of ships, but when a storm swept it away, Xerxes allegedly ordered the sea itself to be whipped, a tantrum that would make any toddler proud. On the second attempt, the bridge held, allowing Xerxes' forces to march into Europe with a sense of destiny as vast as their empire. Now, enter the Spartans, those poster boys of military discipline and olive-oiled abs. The showdown at Thermopylae in 480 BC is the stuff of legends, both in historical annals and Hollywood scripts. King Leonidas of Sparta led a coalition of Greek forces, about 7,000 strong, to hold the narrow pass against the oncoming Persian horde. The terrain was as much a part of the defense as the men themselves. The narrow pass meant that the Persians couldn't use their numerical advantage effectively, and the Greeks, with their phalanx formations, were the ancient equivalent of a human battering ram. For 2 days, the Greeks held firm, but on the third day, a local goat herder named Ephialtes, whose name would forever be entwined with the word traitor, revealed a secret mountain path to the Persians. This flanking maneuver allowed Xerxes to outmaneuver the Greeks, surrounding them. Leonidas, in a move that would earn him a permanent spot in the annals of valor, sent most of his troops away to safety, staying behind with 300 Spartans, a few hundred Thespians, and a smattering of Thebans. While ultimately a tactical loss, the battle became a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds, a narrative that still resonates in tales of heroism today. As the Persians advanced, ransacking Athens and burning the Acropolis, the Greek strategy shifted to the sea. The Battle of Salamis later that year saw the Athenian navy, under the strategic genius of Themistocles, luring the Persian fleet into the narrow Strait of Salamis. Here, the Greek triremes, more agile and quicker in the confined waters, decimated the cumbersome Persian ships. It was a naval version of David versus Goliath, and the Greeks came out on top, effectively crippling Xerxes' naval ambitions and forcing him to retreat to Asia, leaving behind a portion of his army. The final nail in the coffin for Xerxes' Greek ambitions came in 479 BC at the Battle of Plataea. Led by the Spartan general Pausanias, the Greek city-states united to defeat the Persian land forces decisively. This victory effectively ended Persian attempts to conquer Greece, marking a turning point in the Greco-Persian Wars. Now, let's not paint this as a simple case of good triumphing over evil. The Greeks, with their city-state squabbles and penchant for treachery, were far from the paragons of virtue often depicted in romantic narratives. Likewise, the Persian Empire, despite its imperial ambitions, was a remarkable entity, a melting pot of cultures and innovations that left a lasting mark on the world. As the dust settled and Xerxes returned to his empire, the Persian dream of European expansion faded. Yet this was not the end of Persian influence, merely a shift in focus. The empire continued to thrive, its satrapies functioning like well-oiled cogs in a vast machine. It wasn't until the rise of Alexander the Great, nearly 150 years later, that the Persian Empire would meet its end. But what of its legacy? The Persian Empire, with its roads and administrative genius, laid the groundwork for future empires. Its approach to governance, respecting local traditions while maintaining central authority, echoes in the management of modern states. The empire's cultural and scientific advancements, from Zoroastrianism to the development of advanced irrigation systems, contributed to a rich legacy that has influenced societies far beyond its borders. In geopolitics, the Persian Empire is a reminder of the complexities of imperial power. It teaches us that empires are not just built on conquest, but on the delicate balance of control and concession, force and diplomacy. The legacy of Xerxes and his predecessors is a tapestry of triumphs and failures, a testament to the heights of human ambition and the depths of human folly. As we close the chapter on Xerxes and the Persian Empire, let's remember that history is not merely a collection of dates and battles, but a reflection of human nature in all its complexity. Empires rise and fall, but their stories, with all their triumphs and tragedies, continue to shape the world we live in today. So, next time you find yourself pondering the grand narratives of history, remember that behind every empire is a tale of ambition, resilience, and the eternal struggle for power. And isn't that a story worth telling?